Chapter 109. The long silence proved that this request made by the anti-government army was an extremely attractive exchange condition for the Tai family, for Tai Ziyuan, and for Representative Pabre, whom he and his mother had already decided to support. Tai Ziyuan knew very well that if it weren't for the complicated political environment of the four mountainous states, as well as the increasing military pressure of the hawkish figures in the Federation, the anti-government army led by the leader of Nan Shui definitely wouldn't have taken the initiative to ask for peace. However, he had to admit that even so, the anti-government army still had enough bargaining chips to exchange for the corresponding conditions. During the early stages of the election, Representative Pabre cannot influence the internal decisions of the Federation government. Tai Ziyuan broke the silence and reminded the other party. Pabre can't, but public opinion can. The Tai family's secret influence can, the middle-aged man said calmly. If the citizens of the Federation knew that the presidential candidate Representative Pabre is taking a huge political risk to negotiate peace with us, the ruthless anti-government army, and at this time, the Federation government went against the flow and forcefully launched a military attack against us, they will definitely issue the strongest rebuke to the Federation government. I admit that what you said makes sense. This kind of exchange of benefits is indeed very attractive. After a moment of silence, Tai Ziyuan said, but I can't answer your request immediately. Please give me some time. I can't stay in the Federation's core area for too long. You should know that. The middle-aged man smiled and said, although the Bureau of Proclamation won't care about me, I still respect the hounds of the Federation and the spiders of the Federation Bureau of Investigation. If I stay in the Federation for too long, I might be underestimating them. Tai Ziyuan pushed the coffee cup aside and said with a smile, since you've already taken the risk to come here, why can't you take the risk and wait for a few more hours? The reason I dared to take the risk and come here today is because I know that no one in the Federation government would guess that I dared to take such a risk. The middle-aged man said calmly, if you stay too long, it's not a risk, it's a fool. Then how should I contact you? With your ability, it should be easy for you to find out how I came in. When the time comes, I'll ask you to pass on the final decision to that young man. The corners of Tai Ziyuan's lips curled up slightly, and he said with a smile, this way, I still have to guarantee that young man's safety within the Federation's borders. Mr. Wuxia, your considerations have never left anything out. No, I don't even know how much time I have left to run for my life after going down from the second floor. The middle-aged man said with a smile. Tai Ziyuan quietly stared into his eyes, as if he wanted to discern what the other party had guessed from his words, or if it was just a habitual joke. A moment later, he looked at the other party and said seriously, your considerations are not bad. The exchange of benefits is indeed what I value, but what I value even more is the Federation's future. If I have the chance to capture you and kill you, I don't mind informing the federal military. Right now, I haven't informed them because I respect the role of a negotiator. Tai Ziyuan said calmly, once you leave the scene of the ball, perhaps I really will have the Federation government do everything in their power to capture you. There has always been a saying that if the anti-government army didn't have you, they would have long become a dish in the hands of the government. This kind of temptation is actually no less than reaching a peace agreement. Hearing these words, the middle-aged man smiled slightly. After fighting with the Federation government for so many years, he knew better than anyone how much these privileged people in the Federation wanted to destroy the business in the mountains. These people who truly controlled the Federation were cold and heartless. However, he was sure that the other party wouldn't make a move at this moment at least, because this wasn't in line with the true interests of the other party's family. This time he was taking a huge risk. He didn't even hesitate to expose his most successful spy within the Federation to meet with the successor of the Tai family. On one hand, it was because the anti-government army situation was indeed very dangerous. On the other hand, there was an even more important personal reason. He wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of person the new leader of the Federation's future was like. This kind of first-hand information was far more important than any kind of intelligence. Seeing Tai Ziyuan, the middle-aged man wasn't disappointed, but he was somewhat disappointed. He wasn't disappointed because he was sure that this successor of the Tai family wasn't a stupid person. However, this was also the reason why he was disappointed. Moreover, He could see that this person didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy or moral support for the anti-government army. Everything that was presented in the conversation was a naked judgment of benefits. As if he could guess what this second-in-command of the anti-government army was thinking, Taizion slowly said, "Today, when the Empire is preparing to launch an invasion at any time, the anti-government army is still dividing the hearts of the people of the Federation for those illusory reasons, wasting the Federation's resources, and restricting the military strength of the Federation. In my eyes, you should all be considered traitors. The Bureau of Proclamation shouldn't give you legal status." The middle-aged man thought for a moment and then said seriously, "You and the family behind you are vested interests in the political structure of the Federation. Your opinion might not necessarily be correct. If the Empire really invades, I believe that in terms of resisting the enemy, the soldiers in the mountains will be more respectable than the people of the 4 major military regions of the Federation." "There's no need to judge things that haven't happened yet," Taizion said. "No words can change the image of the anti-government army in my heart. We have never cared about how the important figures of the Federation view our cause. Perhaps in the distant future, we are destined to be a pair of natural enemies that can't coexist, but at least for now we can work together," the middle-aged man said. "The coexistence of a cat and a mouse might be a very interesting thing. I really want to know who is the cat and who is the mouse. The will of the people cannot be resisted. The 7 major families are deformed existences. No matter how strong they are, there will be a day when they will become a street rat that everyone wants to beat down in front of the tide of history," the middle-aged man said calmly. "This is Mr. George Carlin's opinion, and it is to encourage you. I will never deny this," Taizion said, "but I always think that you are the big rats of human society. We can still work together if our paths are different, but if we don't agree, there is no need for a deeper conversation." The middle-aged man stood up with a smile and said, "If there is any good news, please inform that young man. If there is no good news, I will pour a cup of wine for your friend's friend in the mountains as a memorial." Taizion stood up with a smile, ignoring the psychological attack of the other party. He said, "One last question. Where does your confidence come from? Why didn't the Federation catch you after confirming that you left the ball? Just like when you followed Sulu upstairs to make sure that there was no danger." "Information is the source of all power." The middle-aged man bowed elegantly, which didn't match his vulgar temperament, "and my ability is a secret." Lai Zion was silent for a long time before he said, "After this short cooperation, I will aim to destroy your armed forces for a longer period of time. But I have to say, in the entire universe I only admire 5 people, and you are one of them. Today, I am able to negotiate with you for the first time since my coming-of-age ceremony. I have benefited greatly. I am very curious about which 5 people. I wonder if young Master C can satisfy this little vanity of mine." The middle-aged man's eyes lit up, showing just the right amount of curiosity. "Other than you, there is that ignorant man by the lake, George Carlin, whose fate is unknown. My distant relative from 8 generations ago, the current director of the Bureau of Proclamation, and the Empire's princess who is said to have reached Mecha level 6 at the age of 12, Taizion said seriously. "In my life, I will work hard for the 5 of you. Oh, human strength is sometimes exhausted. Everyone has their own areas of expertise. For example, in the field of information, I don't believe that there is anyone in this world who is better than me. Of course, this is still my secret. Then there is that old man in Philadelphia. I don't think there is anyone in this world who is stronger than him in terms of individual combat power. Young Master C, don't push yourself too hard. Hard work doesn't necessarily mean that you will achieve it." Taizion smiled and said, "Actually, I only hope that in the future, all the outstanding people in the Federation will become my subordinates." The middle-aged man sighed in admiration. Although the son of an aristocratic family is disgusting, this kind of self-confidence is indeed terrifying. The second-in-command of the anti-government forces appeared in the core area of the Federation just like that, and then quietly left, not even leaving behind a shadow. He only left a clue for the Tai family to follow. However, if the Tai family was willing to accept the conditions of the anti-government forces, that clue would be a secret that the Tai family had to keep. Taizion raised his wrist to look at the time. After silently counting a few times in his mind, he said to Butler Jean beside him, "Prepare a secret line." I want to talk to my mother. Butler Jean nodded in agreement. They had already given that person enough time to leave. If he really fell into the hands of the federal military, it would only mean that there would come a day when the legend would lose its luster. He used the identity of Uncle Shi Qinghai. After Butler Jean gave the order to his subordinates, he said softly, Shi Qinghai graduated from University 1 and is a very important young official of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. Who would have thought that he was actually a spy for the anti-government forces? I'm more curious about why the most successful intelligence chief of the 37th constitutional era deliberately left Shi Qinghai for us. Taizion closed his eyes and said, using the life of a spy as a safety valve to test the sincerity of the family doesn't seem to be in line with that person's usual style of doing things. Keep an eye on Su Lu and Shi Qinghai. Taizion's face was expressionless. Ensure that the former is not harassed. Prepare to contact the latter or arrest him. After leaving the ball, Sulu didn't know that Uncle Shi and Taijian had a very far-reaching conversation. At this time, he was walking among the snowy trees of the university campus in low spirits. He didn't have the self-awareness of a person involved in history at all. He was just a small figure, but this small figure had indirectly caused a small ripple in the great era. Of course, in the current difficult situation, the anti-government forces were willing to temporarily give up the political ideology that they had always believed in. That person even took a huge risk to come to the Federation to negotiate with them personally. Presumably, even if Sulu didn't exist in this world, they would still do everything they could to find Taizun. But the problem was, if Sulu didn't exist, then at this ball it was very likely that Senator Macklin's people or some other forces had beaten them to it. They had persuaded the Tai family and the Tai family's chosen partner, Senator Pabre. A thin layer of snow still accumulated on the grass by the Rose River. It glowed faintly under the moonlight. In his suit, Sulu felt a sliver of cold. He blew on his hands but wasn't worried that he would catch a cold. Ever since he had started practicing that strange set of movements with the uncle, it seemed that it was very difficult for him to get sick. His gaze shifted from the two moons above his head to the east, and he saw that familiar female apartment building. The plum garden was still there, but Su Li's heart was unusually calm. He knew that Zhang Xiaoming had a secret, but if the other didn't want to tell him, he wouldn't want to investigate further. The inside of his GU suit was filled with cold sweat. After finding out about Taijian's shocking identity, Su Li's emotions were very complicated. That conversation from before had made him very nervous. He stubbornly maintained his calm in front of the other just to preserve his little bit of self-esteem. Even if the self-esteem of a small figure was somewhat pitiful in front of a person with special privileges in the Federation. For the time being, he didn't dare to go to Area H1. Although everyone thought that the person inside the Black Mecha was Taizun, Sulu still didn't dare to take the risk. At this time it was already late at night. He suddenly found that he had nowhere to go, but he didn't want to go back to his room in the pear garden. Only now did he understand that after escaping from the Eastwoods district to the capital ring for a year, he was still just a lonely and pitiful fellow. Right at this moment, he suddenly saw that on a remote embankment by the cold Rose River, there was a smear of red that burned like fire in the night. It was flashing incessantly in the cold wind. It was Zhou in her red suit. There was an orphan girl by the night river. Although Sulu loathed the character of the Zhou siblings, he still couldn't help but worry when he saw this scene. He walked quietly in the direction of the embankment, afraid that he would startle the other, and cause the other to do something crazy. However, before he could get close to the embankment, he saw a very familiar figure dashing out from the frosty grass outside the embankment and pouncing directly on the red suit. In the distance, the sounds of Zhou struggling, cursing in a low, angry voice, and crying could be heard. Chapter 110. Shi Qinghai was in a terrible mood. Ever since his boss arrived in Linhai, his mood had never improved. As a professional, he had been a spy within the Federation for so many years. He had always carefully hidden his identity, and completed many missions assigned by the organization. He did feel very tired, but sometimes when he thought about it he would feel proud. However, he never thought that after working so hard within the Federation for so long, he would have to face such a dangerous situation because of the organization's sudden idea. Regardless of the outcome of the negotiations between the anti-government forces and the crown prince, Shi Qinghai knew that his identity could no longer be hidden. Even if the Federation temporarily ignored him after this incident, the Tai family would definitely not care about his life. If he was arrested by the Federation, what awaited him would be a life sentence. Shi Qinghai knew that there was no light in front of him. He could only wait and see when the darkness would come. He had thought about leaving, but in the Federation, where could he go? Unless he returned to S2's Huanshan Sizhou. However, the organization did not give him an order to leave. If he returned without an order, it would be no different from betraying the organization. In the anti-government forces, people like him were just pawns that could be sacrificed at any time. No one cared about their safety. This fact made him feel very bad. His handsome face was full of gloomy lines. He sat by the Rose River embankment, waiting for the final judgment to come. In the end, he did not expect to see the scene of a girl in a red dress jumping into the river. He pushed Zhou to the ground. Looking at this woman's cold eyes, beautiful face, and extremely cruel expression towards others and herself, Shi Qinghai did not know why he felt extremely angry. He said in a low voice, "I really don't know if you have a brain. It's just a little boy who didn't choose you to be his bed partner. Do you have to live or die?" Zhou, who was pushed to the ground, stared at Shi Qinghai's hateful face. She suddenly struggled and roared like an angry lioness, "It's all your fault. It's all your fault." Zhou was not sure if she liked the crown prince brother, because in these 2 years she had only seen him twice. But in these years, everything seemed to convince her that she should like Taizian. She had to like Taizian. However, today's double moon festival ball made everything disappear. Thinking of the noble lady who had always been generous with her love for her, and thinking of all these years of waiting, she felt cold in her heart. It seemed that there was nothing worth cherishing anymore. So she left her friends, left the ball, and came to the quiet Rose River embankment. Perhaps she just wanted to commemorate her past in the cold moon. But she did not expect to attract a hungry wolf. Shi Qinghai was a very delicate guy, but he was very strong. Zhou, whose wrist was held by him, could not get up no matter how hard she struggled. Shi Qinghai felt the soft body under him. At the moment when he was ready to die, he suddenly felt a trace of excitement that he had not felt for a long time. After being a playboy for many years, he seemed to have become numb to women. But today on the grass, looking at Zhou's helpless and beautiful face, he gradually had a reaction. In the cold night, this pair of hostile men and women, because of their different experiences, had the same feelings of disappointment and sadness. They rolled on the grass and stared at each other fiercely. Zhou found that she was not as strong as this man. After looking at him quietly for a moment, she exerted strength in her waist and abdomen and bit Shi Qinghai's palm. Shi Qinghai's handsome face twisted, and the back of his hand suddenly bled. He was angry and slapped Zhou's head. He scolded, "Do you think I really have tender feelings for women?" Zhou looked at him coldly and said, "Either you kill me today or you wait to be killed. Once is enough for this kind of threat." Shi Qinghai stared at the fierceness on the woman's face and suddenly felt very excited. He said in a low voice, "Don't forget how I treated you when you threatened me in the garden." The wound on Shi Qinghai's thin lips proved that the scene in the garden after the ball was erotic and intense. The young man and woman on the thin snowy grass seemed to have thought of that scene at the same time. Some strange emotions appeared in their eyes, and almost at the same time, they made the same move and kissed each other fiercely. Sulu stood at the edge of the woods and stared blankly at the scene by the river embankment. He could not understand how the story had developed into such an erotic scene. He thought that Mr. Shi was indeed a hooligan, and that Zhou was indeed a psychopath. He had infinite admiration for them. There was nothing for him to do, and he did not know where to go. He scratched his head and walked to the iron gate of the pear garden at around 11 o'clock the next day. An automatic alarm rang in a room in an apartment building in Linhai. Shi Qinghai immediately opened his eyes. Although in the hearts of all his colleagues, he was an extremely lazy and depraved playboy, but the good habits of a spy always played a role in certain details. Avoiding the scattered wine bottles under the bed, Shi Qinghai walked into the bathroom. After quickly washing up and dressing up, he made himself a very nutritious breakfast and began to read today's electronic newspaper. After reading the newspaper, He threw the plates into the sink and walked back to the bedroom. He began to stare blankly at the women on the bed who were still in a deep sleep. Outside the window it was already cold and snowy, but inside the window it was as warm as spring. The woman on the bed was completely naked. Her red dress was thrown on the corner of the bed, and the thin red silk quilt was carelessly draped over her, revealing her smooth, jade-like back and the shocking curves of her waist and hips. The woman was sleeping with her face facing the window, and only her graceful back was exposed to Shi Qinghai. Her jade-like skin contrasted with the red silk quilt, made her look particularly attractive. Half of her plump butt was covered, and her slender, smooth thighs were completely covered. Only the faint lines could be seen, which added to her seductiveness. Shi Qinghai had forgotten how much wine he drank last night. He did not know how many one-night stands he had in his life, but quietly looking at the woman on the bed, looking at her full of seductive curves and her naturally wavy hair, there was a strange feeling in his heart. If it were not for the constant fear of being arrested by the Federation, he might never have had sex with such a troublesome person, especially when he was very clear about this woman's background and her coldness. "Don't pretend to be asleep," Shi Qinghai said indifferently. "I have to go to work today." Zhou Yu lazily turned over on the bed, her eyes still closed. The remnants of makeup between her eyebrows were not ugly, but instead gave off a beautiful feeling like a red flower after the rain. She subconsciously pulled up the thin, red quilt to cover her chest, then slowly opened her eyes and asked, "What time is it?" 11 o'clock. Hearing Zhou Yu's somewhat hoarse voice, Shi Qinghai, the playboy, actually felt a little shaken. He thought of the madness last night, and the woman on the bed who seemed to be lewd, but was actually a little inexperienced. At the beginning it was hard, but at the end it was a river. Zhou Yu sat up on the bed, turned around and began to put on her clothes. She slightly lowered her head and said indifferently, "Don't let anyone know what happened last night." "I think so too," Shi Qinghai said calmly. Zhou Yu's back slightly stiffened. After a moment she said, "Don't say you know me in the future." "That's what I think too." Shi Qinghai's reply was still as calm and cold as ever. Zhou Yu put on her clothes and walked to the door of the apartment. Then without any warning she burst into tears. Her tears washed over her face like rainwater, turning the remnants of the makeup into a field of flowers. A field of flowers. Shi Qinghai looked at her quietly. He knew that this woman was not crying because of his attitude. Maybe she was crying because of something that she herself did not fully understand. He knew that Zhou Yu was really crying, heartbreakingly, desperately, crying for the past, crying for the past, crying for herself, crying for others. This rogue official of the Investigation Bureau of the Federation knew women very well. Even when women were crying, they would care very much about whether they looked good or not. Only when they really treated themselves like a broken pot, would they grimace, with snot bubbles coming out of their noses, and contort their facial features in pain, just like Zhou Yu at this moment. "Don't cry. I'm about to die, but I didn't cry. What do you have to cry for?" Shi Qinghai's expression was particularly gloomy. At this moment the intercom in the apartment rang. Shi Qinghai picked it up and noticed that the red light was coming from the intercom. This meant that it was a secret call from an unknown line, and that it had gone beyond the legal monitoring of the Investigation Bureau. After a moment of silence he picked up the phone. Then he heard a strange voice. "The initial plan has been reached. We need more details." After this sentence the phone was abruptly cut off. Shi Qinghai's expression became more and more solemn. At this time, he still did not know the details and results of the negotiation between the middle-aged man and the crown prince last night. However, this phone call indicated that the negotiation seemed to have been successful, and that he did not have to start running away immediately. The work began. Shi Qinghai put down the phone and took a deep breath. When he turned around, he found that the girl in red had already disappeared. "I'll be very busy these days." Sulu listened to the voice on the other side of the phone quietly. He did not answer, but listened very carefully to Shi Qinghai's words. "You know that I'm an official of the Investigation Bureau, and I often have to carry out some shady missions. So maybe one day I'll disappear." Shi Qinghai said casually on the other side of the phone, "If one day I really disappear, don't worry too much and don't try to find me." His voice was relaxed, but Sulu smelled a trace of an inauspicious sign. He wanted to ask, but from his friend's tone, He could tell that it was impossible for him to tell the truth. The problem now is that my missions are all secret. If I disappear, maybe the investigation bureau will investigate you. Shi Qinghai's voice on the other side of the phone became extremely serious. Just tell the truth. Don't try to hide anything in front of those professionals. You can't hide anything from them. Besides, we're just ordinary friends. They should be able to find out the truth. I don't know how you know Taizan, and there's no need to know now. I just want to remind you that if you run into big trouble after I disappear, you can try to mention his name. I believe there shouldn't be too much of a problem. Sulu had been quietly listening to Shi Qinghai's instructions, but at this time he couldn't help but ask, no matter how secret a mission is, there will be a day when it's completed. If your disappearance means that you won't come back, I hope you can still let me know. After all, I don't have many friends in the Federation. Shi Qinghai paused for a moment on the other side of the phone, then said, I'll try my best. Sulu held the phone tightly, squinted his eyes out of habit, and said seriously, no matter what kind of trouble you're in, I hope you can take care of yourself. After this phone call, Shi Qinghai disappeared from Sulu's life. After a few days, Sulu even went to the Linhai field office to look for him. In the end, the members of the 4 departments said that Section Chief Shi had taken a 2-month-long leave. No one knew where he was going. Sulu couldn't help but worry, but in the situation where he couldn't contact him, there was nothing he could do. The mysterious Taiyuan also disappeared with Shi Qinghai. Sulu took the risk to enter the H1 area one night, but he didn't find the coffee in the lounge. However, he confirmed that Taizan should still be on campus, but he seemed to be busy with something. For a moment, Sulu was extremely dissatisfied with his life. It was rare for him to have 2 or 3 friends, but all of them seemed to come and go like ghosts, mysteriously disappearing just like that. He thought to himself in annoyance, could it be that in this world, there was someone more mysterious than him? After the late autumn came the cold winter. Heavy snow piled up on the streets of Linhai University. The biting cold wind made most of the students choose distance learning instead of leaving the apartment to listen to the professor's lectures. Sulu still walked through the pear garden, wearing the green military windbreaker that Mrs. Zhong gave him. He braved the wind and snow, silently studying, and silently living his life. The aftermath of the Double Moon Festival dance party had already dissipated, and the students on the road pointed at Sulu had already disappeared. The only interlude was that the son of the Sun family, who had his front teeth knocked out by Sulu, sent a gift to express his intention to reconcile. It was also through this detail that Sulu understood that the heir of the Tai family was indeed an existence that was infinitely revered in certain circles in the Federation. Chapter 111. Sulu's hand that was holding the phone froze for a moment, then he simply said, "Okay." He put the phone away and came back to his senses. It had been more than 20 days since the ball, and he hadn't seen Zhang Xiaoming for more than 20 days. He looked at his class schedule and realized that the next day was the last day of December. Of course, there were no classes. He realized that the peace and solitude had lasted for so long that he had forgotten about the arrival of the new year. At this time, Zhang Xiaoming was in a daze in her single apartment. She glanced at the black-rimmed glasses by her hand, and her delicate face showed a trace of distress and struggle. After the Double Moon Festival ball, Taizan disappeared again, and she couldn't find any opportunity to get close to that person. The failure of this mission didn't make Senator Macklin unhappy. On the contrary, the fatherly elder comforted her and told her to be careful and hide her identity. At the same time, he secretly pointed out that since the male student named Sulu met Taizan by chance, perhaps there would be a good result if she set out from there. Should she use Sulu to get close to that person? Zhang Xiaoming's long eyelashes fluttered twice, and she immediately rejected this idea. She didn't want to hurt that man again after hurting him. On the last day of the 66th year of the 37th Constitution, the Federation was immersed in the atmosphere of celebrating the new year. Although the Empire, which was light years away and across the galaxy from the Westwoods, was still a shadow in the hearts of the Federation citizens, the front lines were too far away, and everyone subconsciously didn't think about that problem. The people of the Federation cast their anxious gazes toward the S2 region. After the election in the S2 region surrounded by the mountains, the Federation government's accusations against the opposition members intensified. accusing them of not really laying down their weapons. The federal military also began to step up its preparations for war. The outbreak of the Civil War once again seemed to be inevitable. Senator Medellin, who was born in the anti-government army, had successfully been elected as a member of the new Federation Management Committee. He had truly entered the core political area of the Federation. However, no matter how loudly he shouted in various meetings in the capital special district, he could not really eliminate the danger of civil war. This was because everyone knew that Senator Macklin could influence the people in the 4 states, but he could not influence the anti-government armed forces in the mountains. After years of embargoes and economic sanctions by the Federation, the anti-government forces in the mountains were on the brink of collapse. They could not just wait to be suppressed by the federal army. They would definitely choose some kind of counterattack. Although there were so many worries for the ordinary citizens of the Federation, life had to go on. These questions about politics and life and death could only make them sigh and lament when they read the electronic newspaper. On New Year's Eve, all the famous restaurants were fully booked, and the neon lights of the amusement park began to shine in the daytime, creating a peaceful and happy scene. Family members and lovers who had holidays occupied the large Ferris wheel and the special restaurants in the world of ice and snow. Compared to the liveliness, the towering Iron Tower in Linhai had lost its charm as a tourist attraction and became incomparably quiet. This was because not many people were willing to run to the top of the Iron Tower in such a cold winter. Sulu didn't take the elevator. Instead, he carried his backpack and climbed up the Iron Tower step by step. His face was slightly red, and beads of sweat seeped out from his hair. However, his breathing was still steady, and he didn't feel tired at all. Today he could already train his nerves and muscles in his daily life, making the mysterious power in his body more and more peaceful, and also more and more powerful. The cold wind whistled on the sightseeing floor of the Iron Tower. The orange-colored lights were pulled into lonely lines, nestled on the cold metal body. There was no one, only a girl in a dark brown windbreaker by the railing in the distance. She was holding her chin and looking at the city scenery of Linhai in a daze. She wore a cute velvet hat and pink gloves. Her long eyelashes blinked in the cold wind, but as if she did not feel the cold, she just quietly looked outside the railing. Sulu was a dozen meters behind her, quietly looking at her, somewhat lost in thought. They had not seen each other for a few days, but when they met again, his state of mind returned to the original situation, incomparably calm and happy. "You're here." Zhang Xiaoming turned around and smiled at him. Sulu walked up and gently smiled. He took off the backpack on his back and threw it at her feet. Standing beside her, he followed her gaze and looked outside the railing. He saw a few clouds floating in the snowless sky, and on the roofs of the buildings in Linhai, there were traces of ice and snow left from this winter. The whole city was in a New Year's atmosphere, but he still felt a little lonely. The scenery here is not very good. Sulu imagined the girl's mood when she looked here and said, "Why did you want to meet here?" "When I was young, my parents were very busy with work, and I didn't want to sit in those small rooms on the Ferris wheel, so I liked to come here to see the scenery by myself." Zhang Xiaoming exhaled a mouthful of fog and stared blankly at the shadow of the Ferris wheel in the distance. She said, "That day at the ball, I refused to dance with you. I hope you don't mind." "I said that day, I don't know how to dance." Sulu still narrowed his eyes and looked at the gray sky. He said, "If you still want to say sorry today, I think it's meaningless. Although I have never been in love, I know there is no right or wrong in this kind of thing. You've changed a bit." Zhang Xiaoming suddenly turned her head to look at him and laughed. "That time in front of the teaching building, you were much more eloquent than you are now." Sulu also thought of that conversation and said with a smile, "Back then, I saw things too simply." He turned his head and quietly looked at the light flowing in Zhang Xiaoming's eyes. He noticed that she was not wearing her black-rimmed glasses today. He said softly, "Until today, I still think things are very simple. It's just that, other than me, people in this world always have a habit of making simple things very complicated." Zhang Xiaoming did not expect to hear this. She lowered her eyes and fell into deep thought. After a long time she said softly, "Maybe it's because I am a very complicated person, and you are a very simple person. No, you are a very simple person, but you want to do very complicated things." Suli's hand was holding the railing, and he felt that the railing was as cold as ice. He withdrew his hand and exhaled. He asked, "What is your secret?" Zhang Xiaoming was silent for a long time. She said, "A year ago, I was doing voluntary support work in the office of Senator Medellin in S2. I know that. There are many young people in the Federation who go to the 4 states to do this kind of work." Sulu said, "You are back, and the government has determined that you are a returnee. This shouldn't be a problem. The problem is, until today I am still working for Senator Medellin." Zhang Xiaoming suddenly smiled, but her smile was cold. After hearing Zhang Xiaoming's true identity, Sulu fell silent. After a long time he said softly, "And then, although I have not received professional espionage training, what I do is actually not much different from a spy." Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and looked at the heavy backpack by her feet. She said, "I came back to Yue University for only one purpose, and that is to get close to Tai Ziyuan and help the senator establish some kind of direct connection with him." And then, Zhang Xiaoming looked at him with slight surprise. She continued, "Other than the Double Moon Festival Ball, I have no other way to get close to the mysterious heir of the Tai family." "Oh right, you might not know his true identity yet." Sulu shook his head and stopped this question. He asked calmly, and then, no matter what Zhang Xiaoming said, Sulu only replied with 3 words. "And then?" Zhang Xiaoming looked at him quietly. She took off a pink cotton glove from her hand and put it on his hand. She lowered her head and said softly, "You don't seem surprised at all, and you don't seem angry. Actually, the number of strange things I've encountered in my life is more than you can imagine." Sulu put on the glove on his left hand, and his right hand naturally held her hand. He looked at her and said seriously, "I just don't understand what these things have to do with what happened between us. I am a spy." Zhang Xiaoming looked at him seriously. She didn't understand and said, "Are you not afraid at all?" Sulu muttered a few words in annoyance. He thought to himself, "I'm still a fugitive." He sighed and shook his head. He gently parted Zhang Xiaoming's hair under her cap. He looked at her smooth forehead and said with pity, "If this is your secret, I guessed it a long time ago, but I didn't think that the truth I guess was the truth." Zhang Xiaoming laughed bitterly. She turned her head and looked at the sky outside the railings. She said, "I know I hurt you and I shouldn't have said these things. But if I don't explain it to you, I will feel very bad. You wanted to get close to Tai Ziyuan, so you left me." Sulu helped her organize the messy information. After a moment of silence he said, "And now you realize that I know Tai Ziyuan. If you wanted to get close to him, it would have been more convenient for you to stay by my side. You didn't look for me for so many days. It is clear that you don't want to look back. If I were to return to you under these circumstances, it would be an insult to both of us." Zhang Xiaoming let go of his hand and held her face. Her face was full of relief and determination. "I won't let myself do such a thing." Suli's mood was slightly better. "You once asked me what I thought of George Carlin's theory and the people in S2. I once said that I sympathized with them and was willing to support them, but I don't understand. Is it because you are willing to sacrifice something you can sacrifice the love between us?" Zhang Xiaoming's nose wrinkled in distress. She sighed and said, "Maybe you think it is funny, but it is my belief. And I will definitely return to S2 in the future. Your dream is to be the chief engineer of the Shell Motor Company. The two of us don't have a future to begin with. Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about the present. You are here today. It seems that the people you serve have new requirements for you." Su Li's eyes narrowed. He said mockingly, "I respect any belief, but a belief that requires one to sacrifice one's feelings and betray one's feelings. In my opinion, it is a disgusting thing." Zhang Xiaoming felt his anger. She silently changed the topic. "The pressure on S2 is too great. The soldiers and workers living in the mountains are about to be attacked by the federal military. And the only ones who can change the will of the Federation government are those big families. Tai Ziyuan is the heir of the Tai family, one of the 7 big families. If Senator Macklin can gain his trust, he will be able to help the people in the mountains get through these difficult times. In your opinion, I betrayed the feelings between us for some illusory belief. But in reality, I am doing this for the sake of those fresh lives." After a long silence, Sulu said, "I haven't seen Taiyang for many days. I may not be able to help you on your side. I just want to confess everything to you. Zhang Xiaoming looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears. Sulu took her into his arms. His hand slipped into her brown windbreaker. Sticking close to her soft and warm body, he hugged her tightly and refused to let go. He sniffed the faint fragrance around her neck and said, "You are my first woman." Zhang Xiaoming leaned into his arms and said, "You are my first man. I like you. I like you too. Are you really going to leave me?" "Yes." "Then what is it between us? What was that night? Was it charity for a poor man like me before he died?" Su Li's voice suddenly became angry. Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and held his chin like a kitten. She said faintly, "Just think of it as charity for me. Maybe then you won't be so unhappy. Have you ever thought that those big shots who play politics are just using you? Have you ever thought that you're just a girl who doesn't know anything? You're very childish." Sulu stood up straight, forgetting that she was still a young girl who wasn't even 20 yet. She looked into Zhang Xiaoming's eyes with melancholy. Zhang Xiaoming smiled, but tears began to flash in her eyes. Her nasal voice was very strong. She said with a sniffling voice, "I am still young. I have to be childish while I can." At this moment, Sulu knew that he couldn't persuade her to leave that strange world. He vaguely understood the philosophy and thoughts of some people in this world. At this moment, he began to understand this girl's stubbornness and began to feel the sadness that came early. Chapter 112. After the fireworks bloomed, Sulu and Zhang Xiaoming walked down the iron tower. The stairs were so long, but the two of them hoped it would be longer. Just as the New Year bell rang, they warmed each other and held hands like a real couple. They strolled along the bustling streets of Linhai, not thinking or thinking about anything. When they walked in front of the big holographic screen at the intersection of the city center with freshly baked bread in hand, it was the last-minute countdown of the 66th year of the constitutional calendar. There was a sea of people at the intersection of the street. Young people with excited and praying expressions were watching the constantly changing numbers on the holographic screen. Sulu smiled. He glanced at Zhang Xiaoming in his arms and said, "See? Actually, most people's lives are normal and full like this." The crowd was crowded, and the chill of winter was forced back. Zhang Xiaoming, whose cheeks were slightly red, took off her hat and said, "But we can't always just look at the surface." The two of them were silent in the sea of people, quietly cuddling together. It was strange to say that this young man and woman were used to being silent in front of others. Only when they were together did they seem to have more words and expressions. 10987. As the numbers on the huge screen changed, the people in the square at the crossroads began to loudly count down. Their voices became louder and louder, more and more orderly, shaking the two bright moons in the sky. 3, 2, 1. The numbers finally reached 0, and the 66th year of the constitutional era took its last step. The second hand of the new year welcomed the cheers of countless people and ribbons in the square. Happy New Year! Happy New Year 67! People happily waved the scarves and hats in their hands and blew the trumpets to add noise to the New Year's atmosphere. Their companions began to hug each other, and the young men took advantage of the New Year's atmosphere to bravely hug the girls they didn't know. Zhang Xiaoming held back her laughter as she was dragged away by Sulu away from this noisy and dangerous area. At certain moments, the possessiveness and jealousy displayed by young men would be extremely cute, making a girl's heart feel sweet. However, that trace of sweetness turned into calmness and disappointment in an instant. She looked at Sulu and said, "My mission has failed, so it's also over. There's no meaning in staying in Yue University anymore. I'll probably return to S2 the day after tomorrow." Sulu remained silent. He didn't say anything like waiting for her. After this parting, he didn't know when they would meet again. He also didn't try to keep her. The situation in the 4 prefectures was too critical. She had to return to the place she missed and fight with those strangers. "Be careful." He lowered his head and put the glove back on her hand. He gently held it and then gave her a New Year's hug. Suddenly, his gaze moved from Zhang Xiaoming's shoulder to the hologram screen in confusion. This was because he discovered that the face of Jian Shuier, who was doing the New Year's greeting on the Federation TV station, had suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a very familiar news anchor. At the same time, Sulu wasn't the only one who noticed the change in the hologram screen. The people in the square at the end of the street also looked at the hologram screen in confusion. The female news anchor's expression was slightly flustered. She said, "Now we'll broadcast a piece of news that our station has just received." After saying this, the good news anchor immediately calmed down. A piece of news from a reliable source has confirmed, the Federation TV station's news often had a break in breaking news, but on this special occasion of the new year, it was undoubtedly a very important thing to do. The people in the square at the end of the street quieted down. They looked at the huge hologram screen with a trace of uneasiness, and listened to the female news anchor's voice in the air. The female news anchor's voice was a bit hurried, but there was an unconcealable joy between her eyebrows. The people in the Federation who were watching this news immediately felt relieved. It seemed that the president was not assassinated, nor was it the Empire taking advantage of the Federation's new year to launch a brazen invasion. Then what kind of good news would make the Federation TV station's director make the decision to break in the broadcast at the first possible moment? Just half an hour ago, the Federation Management Committee member Mr. Pabre's transport plane has landed at the Green Dragon Mountain Airport in Region S2. The Green Dragon Mountain Airport is the only air passage between Green Dragon Mountain and the outside world. Currently, it is still under the control of the anti-government forces. The following is the image that our station has just received. The people in the square at the end of the street looked at the hologram screen in disbelief. They saw a tall man wearing a gray windbreaker, under the protection of several aides, walking down the gangway of a shabby transport plane. And below the transport plane, several leaders of the anti-government forces greeted him with a serious expression. The tall man's face was a bit dark. The lines of his face were as sharp as a knife, showing this person's resolute character. His lips were a bit thick. He was the rising political star of the Federation in the past 2 years, Member Pabre, who was deeply supported by the majority of the middle and lower class people. In the news image on the hologram screen, Member Pabre's broad right hand and the hand of the leader of the anti-government forces were tightly clasped together. At the same time, the Federation TV station's news anchor's voiceover continued to sound. "We don't know when Member Pabre left the capital special district and went to the Green Dragon Mountain military area, but according to the press release sent by the member's office, Member Pabre's trip was invited by the anti-government forces leader Nan Shui to negotiate a settlement agreement. According to the latest news, the two sides have reached an agreement on the specific details of the agreement. Within the next 48 hours, the anti-government forces will fully withdraw from the 4 states around the mountain, maintaining an effective zone of peace between them and the government forces. Member Pabre's office has publicly called for the government and the military to maintain a restrained attitude before the settlement agreement is signed. At the same time, they said that the specific provisions of the settlement agreement will be sent to the Management Committee and the President's office in the shortest time possible. Member Pabre believes that this settlement agreement will certainly satisfy the dignity and demands of all parties. According to our station's reporters in the 4 states, before 8 o'clock last night, the anti-government forces had already begun to withdraw, but no one expected that this was to welcome Member Pabre's sudden visit. According to analysts, the reason why Member Pabre's office showed such confidence in the press release is because the member has already obtained some kind of promise from the leader of the anti-government forces, Nan Shui. The anti-government forces will make great concessions in the negotiations and accept the 3 key conditions put forward by the government. The crowd in the square at the end of the street, who had been quietly listening to the news, finally burst into cheers at this time. Whether it was from the news or from Member Medellin's busy lobbying activities, the people of the Federation guessed that the military operation in Region S2 was about to begin, and that a civil war was about to break out. This fact cast a shadow over the new year. However, just after the new year, Member Pabre, who took the risk to travel to the anti-government forces area on a transport plane, brought such a big surprise to the people that they couldn't help but cheer. The President's press release has just responded by welcoming the peaceful intentions shown by the anti-government forces at the arrival of the new year. At the same time, they are grateful to Member Pabre for his tireless efforts for peace, and are grateful to Member Pabre for taking the risk to personally travel to the mountain area. However, the press release also said that Mr. President is temporarily unable to understand the specific contents of the agreement, so he is unable to make a specific evaluation. The management committee has temporarily maintained silence. A liaison officer of the member's office, who is willing to be named, expressed doubts about the true purpose of Member Pabre's trip. He also insisted that the action without the authorization of the president and the management committee is not legal, and that the legendary reconciliation agreement actually has no legal effect. The crowd in the square let out a series of extremely harsh boos. At this time, if the Federation Management Committee dared to pour cold water on this hard-won peace process, it would only cause the dissatisfaction of all the people of the Federation. The official dared not reveal his identity. It was obvious that he was a member who was unwilling to serve him. In the next election, he would be mercilessly abandoned by the angry people. The news footage on the hologram changed to the image of the withdrawal of the anti-government forces that the television station had just received. The anti-government forces wearing dark military uniforms were methodically sitting in armored vehicles along the rugged mountain road and retreating into the deep mountains and forests. Immediately after, the news anchor's voice sounded again. The Ministry of Defense still has not officially responded. According to analysts, the federal military has been preparing for the spring offensive for as long as 2 years. It is impossible for them to slow down the pace of preparation for war because of the reconciliation agreement reached by Member Pabre alone with the anti-government forces. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense, citing that today is a public holiday, rejected our request for an interview. When she said this, the female anchor's expression was very serious, but her voice deliberately paused. It was obvious that she wanted to use the ridiculous excuse of the Ministry of Defense to be booed by all the people of the Federation. General Zhouangxing, the Deputy Director of Logistics of the Ministry of Defense, said in his personal capacity during an interview with our station, "As a loyal soldier of the Federation, he will firmly carry out every order of Mr. President and the Management Committee. However, he is more willing to let the mechas and bullets of the Federal Army pour down on the land of the Empire people. He is very optimistic about the future prospects of this reconciliation agreement. All the signs show that Senator Prabel's adventure has already borne a lot of fruit. Peace may come, but civil war may not start." The female anchor on the hologram looked at the camera and said with a smile, "Without a doubt, this is the best New Year's gift that Member Pabre has given to all the people of the Federation in the 67th year of the constitutional calendar." Hearing the cheers around him, and hearing the voice of Member Pabre, Sulu retracted his gaze from the hologram. He couldn't believe his ears and laughed happily. He looked at Zhang Xiaoming beside him and said, "It looks like you don't have to rush back." Zhang Xiaoming looked at the images on the hologram in disbelief. She asked in surprise and doubt, "Why wasn't there any news beforehand?" The Member of Parliament doesn't seem to know either. Right at this moment, Suli's phone rang. A familiar voice that he hadn't heard for a long time came from the other end of the phone. That voice was full of fatigue and faint satisfaction. "My work is done. Where are you? Have a drink with me." Chapter 113. The bar was full of people celebrating the new year. Stimulated by the alcohol and the good news that had just been broadcasted on the news, people were talking loudly about something and toasting people they didn't know. Sulu struggled to walk to a quiet corner of the bar. When he saw the 2 empty bottles of hard liquor in front of Shi Qinghai, he couldn't help but shake his head. Shi Qinghai was still wearing his wrinkled suit, and his whole body was emitting a sour smell. There was nothing on the table except for a few bottles of amber hard liquor, 2 wine glasses, and a bucket of ice. "Zhang Xiaoming didn't come with you?" Shi Qinghai lazily opened his eyes. Although he had already downed 2 bottles of hard liquor, the eyes of this yuppie-looking official from the Bureau of Investigation were still clear and bright, without a trace of drunkenness. Sulu admired Shi Qinghai's alcohol tolerance the most. He sighed and poured himself a thin layer of alcohol, but added 7 ice cubes. He replied, "She had a party at home today, so she went back first." In fact, Zhang Xiaoming didn't want to go back to that stale home where she only knew how to socialize in high society. However, she had confessed to Sulu that she was a spy, so naturally, Sulu wouldn't bring her to meet Shi Qinghai. After all, Shi Qinghai was an official from the Bureau of Investigation of the Federation. Thinking of Zhang Xiaoming, Suli's expression gradually froze. He couldn't completely understand what was on the girl's mind. We haven't seen each other for a few days. Why did that woman come back to you? Shi Qinghai saw his expression and frowned. When he found out that Zhang Xiaoming and Su Lu were together over the phone, he immediately guessed that it was related to Senator Macklin. Thinking that the female student might want to get close to Tai Zilan by returning to Su Lu, he couldn't hide the disgust in his heart. He said coldly, "Did you forget what happened before the ball?" Su Lu smiled honestly. Although he couldn't guess what Shi Qinghai was worried about, he could tell that he was concerned about him. He avoided the question and said, "Let's talk about you. What kind of secret mission made you leave for so long? I went to the 4th department to look for you, but even your staff members didn't know where you were." "Well, since it's a secret mission, of course those little bastards wouldn't know." Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and said proudly, "Nominally, I just took a 2-month leave and went to the tropical south for a vacation." "Since that's the case, of course you can't tell me about the mission," Su Lulu said. Shi Qinghai shrugged and silently agreed. He lay on the sofa comfortably and drank while watching the TV in the bar. The TV screen was still repeating the breaking news. On the screen, Counselor Pavel looked very calm as he walked up the gangway. The wind in the S2 Green Dragon Mountain area made his windbreaker flutter in the wind. Shi Qinghai looked at the screen and pursed his thin lips. He narrowed his eyes and fell into deep thought. In the past few days he had been very busy. The communication between the Tai family and the anti-government army was all done by him alone. He had to negotiate the conditions, send the information back and forth, and clash of wills. It was very tiring for him. The second in command of the anti-government army had left Linhai a long time ago, so he had to do everything by himself. He used a secret channel and devoted himself to this shocking behind-the-scenes deal. Not only did he have to avoid the attention of the Federation government, but he also had to avoid the surveillance of the Tai family. The pressure was as heavy as a mountain. It was so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe, and he didn't even have time to take a shower. Now that everything was over, and both parties had reached an agreement, the past few days of hard work and tension seemed to have exchanged for a good result. Looking at Senator Pabre, whose face was as dark as iron on the screen, he suddenly felt a little exhausted. "Did you know? This guy who looks like a rock on the screen will become our president next year." Shi Qinghai put down his wine glass and lit a cigarette. He took a deep breath and sighed in satisfaction. He bitterly added in his heart, "At least before this guy is officially elected president, I should be safe in the Federation." Looking at Senator Pabre shaking hands with the leader of the anti-government army on the screen, Shi Qinghai was amazed by the influence of the Tai family in the Federation. Choosing to make Pabre appear in front of all the Federation citizens during the new year in the form of a breaking news event, it had to be said that this was a way to maximize the benefits. But the key was that the Tai family had to have this kind of control over the media, as well as the ability to judge the countless factions within the Federation government. Only then could this news event catch everyone off guard. If the citizens of the Federation could really get rid of the shadow of the Civil War, then they would definitely remember for a very long time that when everyone was celebrating the new year, a distinguished senator of the Federation took a great risk and secretly went to the mountainous area controlled by the anti-government army, and reached a peace agreement with the anti-government army. From today onwards, it would be very difficult for people to forget the moment when Senator Pabre, wearing a trench coat, walked down the gangway of the transport aircraft with a calm expression. "It's this year." Sulu reminded Shi Qinghai that it was already past 12 o'clock. He shook his head and said, "Although I also like Senator Pabre very much, the political aspect is too far away from us. I don't know if he can successfully get elected. Trust me, he is already the president." Shi Qinghai smiled a little tiredly. He thought to himself that if Senator Pabre still couldn't grasp this opportunity under such a wave of public opinion, then it could only mean that the higher-ups in the organization and the Tai family had all misjudged him at the same time. At the same time, he also thought that the ordinary citizens of the Federation only saw this scene on the news today, but they didn't know that in order for this to happen on time on the new year, the two parties involved in this incident had secretly negotiated many times. In the end, they were able to sign the agreement in the end. The ordinary citizens also didn't know how much inside information was hidden behind this seemingly legendary senator's journey of reconciliation. Sure, Qinghai knew all of these inside information because he was the person involved. He quietly looked at Sulu and thought about the conversation at the Double Moon Festival ball. He thought about how his good friend in front of him would probably never know about the important role he played in this incident, and he couldn't help but smile slightly. After stuffing out the cigarette, Sure Qinghai raised his wine glass and said to Sulu, "To the peace of the Federation." Sulu raised his wine glass and replied with a smile, "To our future president." Sure Qinghai downed the strong wine in one gulp, and a strange smile appeared on his face. "Yes, to our president." The busy workers had already left, and the light screen connected by the optical fiber had also been dismantled and was ready to be transported away. Taizion stood on the second floor and looked down at the empty hall, but it was as if he could still see the computer light screen that displayed the important information of the major forces of the Federation, and the workers who were responsible for determining the specific links and analyzing the reactions of all parties after the incident. This was a villa on the outskirts of Linhai, and it was the property of the Tai family. In the past few days, this villa had become a temporary decision-making room, specifically responsible for dealing with the negotiations with the S2 anti-government army. In the past few days, the light screen was always on, and the workers were always busy, walking as if they were running. Taizon's lips slightly curved and he smiled. After the coming-of-age ceremony, he finally had full authority. For the first time, he truly began to independently handle a major event that could affect the entire Federation. Under the close supervision of Lady Tai, with the help of countless workers from the family, and after many days of exhaustion, he was finally satisfied to see that his work had a good result. He only saw the news on the light screen once, but he saw the news 4 minutes before anyone in the Federation, and even the president. This was because this piece of news had passed his review and was sent to the news department of the Federal Television Station. The Federation TV station was the national TV station, and no company, no tycoon, not even the legendary 7 families had the ability to completely control it. But countless forces would try to reach out their hands in the Federation TV station. And the Tai family, who had always been low-key and steady, was the most important news department of the Federation TV station, and had the most powerful influence. Taizion held the railing with both hands, and recalled the scene in his mind. He was very satisfied with Mr. Pabre's performance in front of the camera. He believed that in the near future, Mr. Pabre's campaign office would definitely choose that scene as the most important poster cover, and paste it all over the Federation streets, to win him countless votes. Thinking about this, the youth couldn't help but smile, and he was very satisfied with his work these past few days. The negotiations with the anti-government forces were exceptionally difficult, because the other party was still unwilling to give in to the 3 most important conditions proposed by the Federation government. And if Taizion couldn't convince the other party to give in, then even if he reluctantly signed the agreement, he was afraid that in front of the president and the management committee, he wouldn't be able to get a shred of approval. The negotiations continued until the last moment. At that time, Mr. Pabre had secretly boarded the Tai family's private spaceship and arrived at the mountainous 4 states of Region S2. That inconspicuous transport aircraft was already full of fuel, and the old-fashioned engine was already roaring, but the 2 parties in charge of the negotiations still hadn't reached an agreement. Reaching an agreement was very important, but the timing of reaching an agreement was actually even more important. Both parties knew very well what it meant for Mr. Pabre to choose the time of the new year, so the anti-government forces kept delaying it, inevitably because they wanted to use the time to exchange for benefits. In the end, it was Mr. Pabre himself who spoke from under the transport aircraft. If the anti-government forces still insisted, then he would rather take the risk of becoming a laughingstock in the political world after the matter was exposed and return to the capital directly on the spaceship. It was precisely through this small interlude that Taizion once again confirmed that his opinion of Mr. Pabre was correct. This Mr. Pabre did indeed have the sincerity and persistence that was rarely seen in the Federation's political circles. Taizion was very willing to see such a person become the president of the Federation. "Young master, we should be leaving." Butler Jean walked up behind him and quietly looked at his side profile, smiling slightly. He knew very well what kind of satisfaction and tiredness a young man would feel after completing such a political operation on his own for the first time. "Yeah, I can finally relax." Taizion sighed and said, "What's my schedule for tomorrow?" Chapter 114. Does anyone know my itinerary for the next day? No. Taizion looked at Steward Jean and said with a smile, if that's the case, where is the danger coming from? According to the internal analysis of the Federation Investigation Bureau, under the current circumstances, the families supporting the presidential candidates should be angry enough with the young master. It's all just speculation. Taizion said, in a few months' time, I'll be leaving Yua University and heading to the Westwoods for military service. Don't tell me you still expect me to be surrounded by bodyguards from my family while I'm in the military camp? On the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional calendar, the snowstorm in Linhai University town raged as usual, covering the entire large city group in snow and ice. Families celebrating the new year were happily shopping on the streets, while students who lived alone in other places were more used to hiding under the warm blankets of their apartments and playing games. However, this habit was broken by a concert this year. All the major campuses were quiet, but the comprehensive gymnasium by the Rose River in the northwest corner of the university town was bustling with noise and excitement. Sulu brushed off the snow on his body and took a deep breath. He raised his head and looked at the huge hologram above the gymnasium. Looking at the familiar purple-haired girl's radiant face on the hologram, he couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. Back in the Donglin region, orphans like them could only stare at the Jian Shuier on the TV screen and shout unrealistic slogans. Who would have thought that in this lifetime, there would be a day when they could see Jian Shuier with their own eyes on the capital ring? Jian Shuier was a superstar in the Federation. Perhaps using the term superstar was a bit inappropriate, because there were as many stars in the Federation as there were stars in the sky, but stars like Jian Shuier were extremely rare. It should be said that this purple-haired girl, who was not yet 18 years old, had quickly occupied the hearts of all the Federation citizens from the day she appeared on Channel 23 of the Federation. Whether it was her sometimes playful and sometimes soft purple hair, her large eyes that seemed to speak, or the warship commander uniform she wore in the TV series from various historical periods, she had become the favorite topic of conversation among the Federation citizens in the past few years. Whenever Sulu thought of Jian Shuier, he also felt that this girl was a true legend. It was said that Jian Shuier's parents died when she was young, and because of a coincidence, she walked onto the Federation's television screen. At that time, she was only playing the role of an adopted orphan in a long-lived family comedy. At that time, Jian Shuier was not yet 12 years old. Her pair of watery eyes revealed the pitiful expression of a little rabbit, and that youthful and adorable face would flash a cheerful smile from time to time. In just one night, she had defeated all the Federation citizens who were born with a natural tendency to pity the weak. This long-lived family comedy ended after 6 years. Although Jian Shuier only participated in the last 1.5 years, the character she played, who was sometimes weak and sometimes strong like an adult, became the most popular character in this comedy. Channel 23 of the Federation television station very cleverly grasped the public's preferences. 1.5 months later, they released the intergalactic TV series Full Metal Rush, which had been running until today. This TV series depicted the entire course of a female Federation warship commander, from her entrance into the military academy, to her internship, and finally her participation in the war against the Empire. The scriptwriter's skill was extraordinary, successfully portraying a female lead who had the wisdom and composure of an adult, but at the same time also had the charm of a young girl. This female lead was naturally played by Jian Shuier. As soon as this TV series was released, it immediately received an unprecedented response. It successfully broke the viewership ratings record of all the Federation television stations except for the news channel, and the little girl who dyed her hair purple became one of the Federation's leading idols. At present, the plot of this TV series had just reached the point where the Enterprise led by Colonel Jian Shuier had broken through the debris flow and was about to arrive at the Great District of Silan. If this trend continued, perhaps they would really have to film according to Jian Shuier's age until she had gone through her entire adolescence and stepped into true adulthood. The TV station chief was not in a hurry, and the audience of the Federation was not in a hurry either. They watched the birth of a legend in the history of television, and there was only joy in their hearts. A star who starred in a TV series at the age of 11.5, who became famous throughout the universe at the age of 14, and who began to bear the pressure of advertising on the Federation television station, could definitely be called a legend. What was even more legendary was the incident that happened in the 64th year of the constitutional era. The Angry Children's Rights Protection Fund, after failing to negotiate with the TV station, sued the Federation television station, as well as the department in charge of the TV station, the Radio Management Committee of the President's Office, to the court. The foundation believed that the Federation television station, as a public property, had ignored the rights of children and continuously squeezed Jian Shui'er's rest and learning time. This was unacceptable. And Jian Shui'er's popularity in the Federation would bring about a very bad trend, which would make the Federation government neglect the protection of children's rights. This lawsuit caused a stir in the Federation for a while, and the matter became more and more serious. It went from the court of first instance to the local circuit court, and finally to the Supreme Court. The two sides of the lawsuit were still arguing non-stop. Public opinion remained silent on this matter, because the public of the Federation could not stand firm on this matter. Those who were busy with work during the day were most used to watching the incomparably cute little girl on the holographic screen when they returned home. And their pity for Jian Shui'er came from the bottom of their hearts. They did not want this little girl to be so busy filming every day that she did not have her own life. The lawsuit became more and more serious, and the Children's Rights Protection Fund, which had a strong background, kept expanding the list of defendants. The Federation television station, the satellite service provider, and even the BD Zhuangchan viewership survey agency were all defendants in this lawsuit. In the end, the foundation even sued two members of the Federation who were in charge of reviewing the content of the TV station. The director of the president's office, who publicly said that Jian Shui'er should be allowed to choose her own content, was naturally not spared. The climax of this dispute in the Supreme Court was in the autumn of the 64th year of the constitutional calendar, when Jian Shui'er personally appeared in court to defend herself. In the solemn court, Jian Shui'er, who was dressed in plain clothes, adorably rubbed her fluffy purple hair and said to the live broadcast camera, "I am very grateful for the efforts that the foundation has made for me. I also understand that the foundation is worried that the rights of minors will not be fully protected, even without any preconditions, but I just want to say that all the decisions that I have made are my own, and I like them." The three words "I like them" seemed simple, but it expressed the attitude of the number one star of the Federation. The Children's Rights Protection Fund still did not give up. They requested that the agreement be ruled invalid on the grounds that Jian Shui'er was not yet 14 years old when she signed the contract with the Federation television station, and that there was no legal guardian's signature on the agreement. At this time, the chief judge of the Federation, who was already 79 years old and had a head of white hair, glared fiercely at the lawyer representing the foundation. He waved the thin pieces of paper in his hand and said, "In my hand is Jian Shui'er's report card for this year. All of them are A+. I also have countless materials that can prove that acting in the TV series did not affect her studies. I know the results of Jian Shui'er's IQ test, but I will not tell you." The chief judge of the Federation looked like an old child. He smiled and looked at the cameras in the court and the stunned lawyers. "I just want to say that a child like her, no matter what career she chooses in the future, will make great contributions to the Federation. But since she has chosen to fill the spiritual life of the people of the Federation, as an old man, I can only show respect." The lawyer of the foundation raised his hand to signal for him to speak. Chief Judge Heing waved his hand in annoyance and said, "She is not yet 14 years old, so the legal documents she signed are indeed useless. But this legal document, I recognize its usefulness, because she is Jian Shui'er." The long-lasting and influential lawsuit became the best news material for the Federation television station news channel, except for the Civil War. The final result of the lawsuit, especially the last sentence of the chief judge of the Federation, made Jian Shui'er's position in the hearts of the Federation citizens even higher. At that time there was a very interesting phenomenon. The two channels with the highest ratings in the entire Federation were broadcasting Jian Shui'er. It was just that Channel 23 was broadcasting the TV series she acted in, while the news channel was broadcasting the strange lawsuit about her. The two channels relied on Jian Shui'er and kept fighting in the ring, which was considered interesting for a while. But who can say that the lawsuit was not more exciting than the TV series? Today was the release of Jian Shui'er's new song as well as her first solo concert. Except for the ending song of the TV series, Jian Shui'er had never sung a song. Today's new song release was not in the capital's special district, nor in the largest city in S1. Instead, it was in Linhai University City. This made the officials and people of Linhai feel extremely proud. Just by looking at the expensive transportation outside the hall, one would know that many state legislators came with their families to watch today. Sulu took out the ticket in his pocket and walked into the hall. His expression was calm, but there was a strange feeling in his heart. For the people of Donglin, the superstar of the Federation Jian Shuier was definitely not as simple as an idol. After the industrial decline, the citizens of Donglin, who relied on the welfare of the Federation to barely survive, were used to seeing Jian Shuier's face every day in their boring lives. After a long period of companionship, the people of Donglin felt that Jian Shuier was not a distant and unreachable star, but more like their little sister next door. Day after day, she accompanied them at dinner time, their coffee time, their drunken time. Habit was a very powerful force that subtly conquered the lives of the people of Donglin. Habit was a kind of love. Perhaps it was not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but it was still love. Chapter 115. According to the symbol on the ticket, Sulu came to a special passage. The passage was very quiet, which made him feel slightly uneasy. The beautiful lady who checked the ticket scanned the barcode of his ticket, and then checked the first layer of his microchip identity. Her face showed a trace of surprise, and then she smiled and welcomed him in. This location is better than the mayor's and Councilman Hai's box. I wonder who he is. He must be a weirdo. He's dressed so shabbily. Who can tell he's a big shot? Sulu had been cultivating the power in his body for the past few years, so his hearing was better than the average person. Even after walking for more than 10 meters, he could still hear the discussion of the girls who checked the tickets behind him. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It was snowing and windy today, but he was still wearing that old military trench coat and holding a VIP ticket in his hand. It was indeed a bit strange. He immediately remembered that this ticket was given to him by Taizun. When he thought about how he had somehow gotten to know the successor of a big family, his feelings became more and more complicated. Outside the best individual box above the main stage of the stadium, Sulu was stopped by the agents in black suits. They carefully checked him, and after confirming that there were no problems, they let him in. Sulu didn't feel any dissatisfaction in his heart. He knew that if he were to enter the box and stay with that kid, he would definitely be constantly checked. The only thing that puzzled him was that he clearly had that exquisite stun baton hidden in his boots. Why did the agent check his feet unintentionally miss it? Pushing open the heavy wooden door of the private room, a light floral fragrance wafted out. It wasn't cloying at all. Suli's spirits were lifted as he looked at the large pot of thousand-star flowers by the floor-to-ceiling window. He saw a skinny youth with a slightly pale complexion standing beside the flower tree that was about as tall as a person. That's right. Although Sulu already knew about Meng Zhiyuan's family background and knew that he was one of the people standing at the top of the Federation, which had a population of tens of billions, when they met again after a few days, Sulu still subconsciously thought of Meng Zhiyuan as that pitiful guy who had fainted in his arms and used indifference and calmness to hide his fondness for commoner food. I was wondering if you would come. Taizian turned around, smiled at Sulu and said, "This ticket is my thank you gift. If you don't accept it, I will be disappointed. Since you gave it to me, of course I will come. Also, I said through the communication device that I have liked Jian Shuier since I was young." Sulu walked over to him and raised his knife-like eyebrows. He knew very well that this young man in front of him was not an ordinary person, and would not interact with him like a normal friend. This was because in front of others, the other would always naturally reveal that kind of aura. However, he tried to treat the other like a normal person because he believed that this was how friends should interact, if the two of them could become true friends in the future. Taizian was not surprised to hear Sulu answer him like this, because he knew what kind of person Sulu was. The corners of his lips curled up, and he quite admired how the other was still so stubborn in front of him. He smiled and said, "Jian Shuier is younger than you. If she heard what you said, she would definitely be so sad that she would not be able to eat." Sulu walked to his side, sniffing the fragrance of the thousand-star flowers. He looked at the empty stage not far below the floor-to-ceiling glass, and suddenly thought of something. He asked hesitantly, "Do you know Jian Shuier?" Although Jian Shuier was the most popular star in the Federation, with Taizion's status as the heir of one of the 7 great families, it should not be difficult for him to get to know her. Taizion shook his head. "I've been transferring schools all these years since she debuted, so how could I know her? But I've seen a few of her TV shows, and she really is a very cute little girl." For him, there were no stars in the world that were worth being infatuated with. In his position, he would look at everything with an appreciative gaze, but he would never be as emotionally invested as Sulu. Perhaps this in itself was a kind of tragedy. Sulu smiled and said, "That's good. I was quite worried that I would hear the bloody and teary history of these stars from the mouths of big shots like you. You can't imagine how big of a blow it is to people like us when our idols are disillusioned. You think too much." Taizion could hear the hidden meaning in Suli's words. He laughed and said, "We're not crocodiles that eat people without spitting out the bones. You don't have to always think of us in the dark. Of course, I won't deny that some people like to use celebrities as a symbol of their strength. But those people don't include me." He added in his heart. Moreover, no one would dare to use Jian Shuier as a symbol of their strength, unless those rich young masters were really tired of living. After Butler Jean arranged the food and drinks, he bowed to the 2 of them and left the luxurious private room. At this time, only the 2 young people were left in the private room. The atmosphere of the conversation suddenly became much more relaxed, and it was more like they were back in the H1 lounge. However, the conversation did not start for long before it came to an abrupt end. This was because Suli's eyes suddenly froze, and it was as if the wind and snow outside the gymnasium had frozen into 2 icicles. He did not blink and did not move as he stared blankly below the floor-to-ceiling window. The gymnasium was dark. There was only a stage and there was only one person on the stage. A purple-haired girl under the age of 18 walked out of the darkness and bathed in the light. The music started. This luxurious private room was directly facing the large holographic screen of the gymnasium, and it was not far from the stage. It was the best position to watch the concert. There was no need for binoculars to clearly see the beautiful and cute face of the purple-haired girl on the holographic screen. The voice input alone made it so that the room could hear the most vivid voice of Jian Shuier. However, Sulu still stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in a daze, looking at the distant figure on the stage. He watched as she changed into her costume, watched as she introduced her new song with some difficulty, and watched as she, who should have only existed in his imagination, appeared in front of his eyes. Far away on the horizon but right in front of his eyes. He did not know how long he had been standing there. Who knew how many times those melodious songs had been played? But Suli's posture did not change at all. Taizion had long lost his patience to keep him company. He sat back down on the comfortable sofa, picked up a glass of low-alcohol wine and sipped slowly. His gaze would occasionally glance at Jian Shuier's face on the holographic screen outside the window, and occasionally close his eyes to listen carefully to the first sounds of this most popular celebrity of the Federation. However, most of the time, his gaze would fall thoughtfully on Sulu, who was standing by the window. He believed that he knew very well what kind of person Sulu was. He was calm, passionate, sincere, and upright. He was not greedy for vanity, and had an innate aversion to seeking connections with the rich and powerful. He was a fellow who was quite lucky to have caught the eye of Professor Jean. This fellow had a talent in mecha that Taizion still could not understand, but he was exceptionally low-key. However, at this moment, as he stared at Suli's back, Taizion suddenly found that he could not quite see through this fellow. Why would a young man who had to work so hard to maintain his dignity and composure in front of him lose his composure like this in front of a female celebrity that only young men and women would be madly infatuated with? No, this was not losing his composure. This was a state where he was completely immersed in the performance, forgetting everything else around him. Taizion's brow furrowed slightly, especially when his sharp eyes noticed that Suli's eyes seemed to be a little bright in the reflection of the full-length window, as if they were wet. He could no longer control his surprise. He stood up and walked over to the window. Sulu stared silently at that incomparably familiar yet incomparably unfamiliar purple-haired girl on the stage below the window. Watching her release her charms like a goddess under the lights, he felt his entire body stiffen. His fingers resting on the full-length window were somewhat numb, and his heart was beating much faster. In the instant that Jian Shuier had appeared on the stage, Sulu had thought of a proverb from the Federation. When a dream becomes reality and appears before people, people will always treat this reality as a dream. At first glance, Sulu had felt that the purple-haired girl on the stage was not real at all, that she was someone who only existed in his dreams. He felt that everything that was happening now was just a dream. He thought that his disobedient stiff body and slightly numb fingers were all because of this reason that he could not wake up. However, following the sound of the song, Sulu woke up. He knew that he was in the luxurious box of the Capital Ring Stadium, not outside the coffee shop on Donglin's Bell Tower Street, and not at the top of an abandoned mine. As the song progressed, Sulu gradually calmed down, but he still stared blankly at Jian Shuier on the stage, his eyes unblinking. He didn't know how many songs she sang or what song she sang, but he just quietly listened and quietly watched until his eyes gradually became moist. A few years ago, under the green tree in the suburbs of Heshi Province's capital, he had once cried to Jian Shuier on the hologram screen, saying that he would take her as his wife. But he knew that the tears at that time were only caused by the fatigue of the muscles in his eyes from staring at the components for a long time in the mine's operation room. But now he really felt very sour in his heart, and had the urge to cry. He finally understood why he had always liked Jian Shuier so much. Even after escaping to S1 Linhai University town, he still did not stop loving that purple-haired girl. It turned out that it was not as simple as liking her. Outside the coffee shop on Bell Tower Street, Li Wei and the group of orphans were laughing and joking as they watched her. On the street, orphans wearing tattered black clothes were laughing and shouting slogans that they wanted to see her. Above the mine, under the dusky twilight of Donglin, he and the uncle held a glass of red wine and silently watched her. To him, Jian Shuier was not a character that only existed on the hologram screen. She was an idol that was popular throughout the Federation. More than that, she was his memories. Those monotonous but fulfilling memories of his time in Donglin. And now, he was a fugitive from the Federation. He was a completely different person. The days in Donglin could never go back. At this moment, Sulu thought of Uncle Fengyu, thought of Li Wei and Changzi, whose whereabouts were unknown, thought of the people in Heshi Province. His heart was calm and incomparably sour. What's wrong? Taizion walked to his side and asked with a frown. Chapter 116. The moment he saw Jian Shuier, Suli's heart, which had been heavy for the past year, gradually opened a door. He naturally thought of everything that had happened in the Donglin district, and realized that he had never forgotten. That was his past. No matter whose identity the chip behind his neck was impersonating, he was still Sulu. A smile appeared on his ordinary face, and he quietly looked at the purple-haired girl who was singing the last song. I have to live well in the future, he said. Taizion frowned slightly and looked at him. I never realized that someone as honest as you actually had the potential to be a philosopher. You only saw your idol, but you actually managed to connect it with how to live. That's because people like you don't know how difficult it is to live. Sulu smiled. His pair of thick eyebrows, which were raised like throwing knives, began to emit a youthful vigor. The cheers in the stadium were cut off by the wide floor-to-ceiling glass, reducing the frenzied atmosphere by quite a bit. Jian Shuier, who had already returned backstage, had no intention of returning. Under the soothing accompaniment of the closing song and the soft lighting, the citizens of Linhai City began to reluctantly leave the stadium. Sulu looked at the venue that retreated like a tide under the window. He was calm and silent. Although he didn't really see Jian Shuier, and didn't have close contact with her, he was already very satisfied. He subconsciously took a deep breath, as if he wanted to firmly engrave the memories of today in his mind, so that he could tell Uncle and Li Wei in his dreams. A faint fragrance wafted into his nostrils. It was the thousand-star flower tree, which was as tall as a person, gently accompanying the youth. The soil in the flower tree was covered with a layer of small white stones. Right at this moment, the door to the luxurious private room opened. Ingzion placed the wine glass in his hand by the window, and was about to put on his coat and leave when a trace of doubt suddenly appeared between his brows. This was because he noticed that butler Jean, who had pushed open the door and entered, had an ugly expression on his face. This loyal subordinate who had followed his family for many years had always been calm and collected, and he rarely displayed such emotions. What happened? The staff of the Federation Investigation Bureau's Linhai Field office stationed at the Radio Management Committee found an abnormal current wave near the stadium. Butler Jean looked at Taizuan and said softly. Sulu had already turned around, but he didn't understand what had happened. The Radio Management Committee was responsible for monitoring the television broadcast. What did the abnormal current wave have to do with people like him? Butler Jean quickly continued, it should be some kind of heat current emitted by some large equipment, but it was hidden in the signal band of the satellite, so it wasn't easy to find. At that moment, the door of the luxury box was pushed open again, and the group of black-clad agents from the Special Task Force entered in a line with vigilant expressions. The leader of the agents said in a deep voice, the Special Task Force has received news that there are some problems in Linhai today. After saying this, the leader of the agents, who was about 40 years old, tilted his head and listened carefully to the voice in his earpiece. He then looked up and said directly, we must evacuate immediately. A tense atmosphere suddenly filled the entire luxury box. The agents of the Special Task Force began to contact their colleagues outside the stadium and began to file a report. Their hands were already on the holsters at their waists. The two agents at the door poked their heads out and looked around vigilantly. Sulu was shocked. He didn't expect to be involved in such an incident right after watching Jian Shui'er's concert. Then his eyebrows twitched slightly because he noticed a strange phenomenon in the room. His right hand, which was hanging by his side, slowly lowered and touched the edge of the flower tree. Hearing the leader of the agents, Taizuan didn't move. He put his jacket on his left arm and looked at Butler Jean quietly. Last night, Butler Jean had already warned him that some forces were starting to become restless. However, he thought that in the Federation society, which was ruled by law, those families wouldn't have the guts to carry out an assassination in broad daylight. Moreover, he had always had good security around him, and not many people knew that he was going to watch the concert today. Therefore, he followed the schedule and came. It's possible that hot start noise that we heard could be from a military mecha. Butler Jean glanced at Taijuan worriedly. This judgment immediately increased the tension in the luxury box. Federation mecha were strictly controlled by the military. If someone wanted to harm Taizuan and actually used a military mecha, it could only mean that the other party's power was unfathomable. More importantly, this was an extremely rare violent method in the strange political history of the Federation, which meant that the other party was crazy. Sulu stood silently behind Taijuan. After hearing this news, a heavy weight weighed down on his heart. He looked at Taizuan quietly, not knowing what this friend of his had done to make some people want to assassinate him at all costs. Fortunately, the Tai family's security measures were airtight, and with the cooperation of the Federation government, they were able to monitor the situation in advance. The capital had also given a clear warning. At this time, the people in the box reacted in advance and should be able to leave in time. The two agents at the door of the box held guns in both hands and walked out of the heavy door calmly with their bodies slightly lowered. They began to confirm the safety of the corridor. In the box, a few Special Task Force agents in black suits had already taken out their standard handguns from their holsters and started to push the safety pins with the thumbs of their right hands. At this moment, more than a dozen extremely shrill sounds of something breaking through the air rang out. More than a dozen hard white stones all smashed into the face of one of the agents. With a loud bang, the agent's face was covered in blood. Blood splattered everywhere. With a muffled grunt, the agent opened fire with the handgun in his hand. He opened fire at Taizuan. Bang 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 bang. A series of rapid and crisp gunshots rang out in the luxurious box. The gunshots of the agents, which had been processed, were crisp but not loud. It was more like the sound of soybeans being fried. After the crackling sound stopped, the box returned to silence. Only the low sound of gunshots still produced a faint echo in the room. The faint smell of gunfire filled the air. The agent's body lay on the floor in a pool of blood. He had been shot at least 4 times. His face was badly mangled by the stones, and one of his eyeballs had burst open. The 40-year-old Special Task Force leader lowered the muzzle of his gun and looked around the room. He confirmed that the last shot that the agent had fired had only grazed Taizuan's body and shot into the wall. Only one of his team members had been hit in the thigh by a stray bullet. It was not fatal. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. The Special Task Force agents reacted quickly when they were suddenly attacked by a mole. They killed that person in the shortest amount of time. However, the Special Task Force leader stared blankly at the body in the pool of blood. He could not believe his eyes. He asked softly, "Balmer, this? Why?" The Special Task Force agents were all vetted countless times to confirm their absolute loyalty to the Federation and the law. Only then were they qualified to be personal bodyguards. Why this agent named Balmer shot at Taizuan, and when he was bribed to become an assassin had become a mystery. Even if he was still alive, there was no way he could answer these questions. Under the glory of the First Charter, he had assassinated the heir of the Tai family. His fate had long been sealed. Therefore, the Special Task Force leader could not understand how his team member had become a criminal. "We need to evacuate immediately." The Special Task Force leader reported the incident in the private room to his team members through the intercom. At the same time, he changed the evacuation plan. He looked at Taizuan and said in a heavy tone, "There is a mole, and the evacuation route is no longer a secret." The Special Task Force leader reported the news of Balmer's betrayal to the Special Task Force officers as quickly as possible. Then, he raised his head and looked deeply at the young man by the window. He should have been grateful to the young man for not letting Taizuan die, and not letting his team of agents become criminals of the Federation. However, his feelings were very complicated and strange. This was because the young man had discovered Balmer's problem earlier than him and the other professionals. Furthermore, he had only used a handful of stones to interfere with Balmer's shooting. Beside the floor-to-ceiling window, Su Li's chest kept rising and falling. He was still in a state of nervousness and fear. There were a few white stones scattered around his feet. He thought that if his reaction had been slightly slower, Taizuan would have been a dead man by now. From the moment the special agent named Balmer entered the private room, Sulu had noticed his abnormality. This was because this was the special agent who had checked on him outside the private room at the beginning. This special agent actually did not find the stun baton he had hidden in his boots. It was either the special agent's professionalism was extremely poor, or he had something very important on his mind at the time and missed this part of it. Special Task Force agents were responsible for protecting the president and some important political figures. How could they have such poor professionalism? However, what really made Sulu wary was this agent's reaction after he had entered the private room. When Butler Jean had mentioned that a military mecha might have already been activated in the vicinity of the gymnasium, this agent had remained as calm as the other agents. However, he appeared to be too calm. So calm that not a trace of doubt or shock could be seen in his eyes. Uncle Feng Yu had once exclaimed that Sulu had the gift of being able to read people's minds. Throughout his years as a mechanic, he had developed a pair of keen and observational eyes. In the shortest amount of time, he could notice even the slightest changes around him. Therefore, when he saw the special agents take out their pistols and start to push the safety pins, his eyes began to narrow nervously. When he noticed the special agent named Balmer push the safety pin with his thumb, the muzzle of the gun started to move in an extremely inconspicuous manner. When he secretly aimed it at Taizuan, he moved. Even if it was a misunderstanding, he had to move. His right hand, which was hanging by the side of the flower pot, grabbed a handful of small white stones. The burning sensation in his body and behind his waist surged and turned into a powerful trembling force. It traveled from his skin to his palm, and he threw it out with all his might. The white stones were mixed with the mysterious power in his body. At that moment they became as sharp as bullets. Thus there was an additional corpse on the floor of the private room. Its eyes were split open, and its face was mangled. Chapter 117. Did you see that? My life isn't easy either. Taizuan didn't look at the corpse on the ground. A person who couldn't speak wasn't worth paying attention to. He smiled as he spoke to Sulu. This sentence was obviously directed at Sulu, who said that people like him didn't know how hard it was to live. Sulu tilted his head and didn't say anything. In fact, he hadn't completely recovered from the shock of what happened earlier. Although he was the first to notice the abnormality of the agent, the gunfight in front of him made the originally spacious luxurious private room seem extremely small. The gunshots ended too quickly, so quickly that he didn't even have time to be afraid of stray bullets. Taizion didn't say anything like thank you for saving his life again. He couldn't use his own life to repay the favor of saving his life, so it was fine as long as they both kept it in mind. We should go. The middle-aged leader of the agents saw that the young master of the Tai family was still chatting with Su Lu as if nothing had happened. He couldn't help but frown and urge them again. At this time, Butler Jean, who had been on the phone all this time, walked over and said calmly, I've already spoken to the director of the special task force. You guys stay in this room for the time being and don't go out. The leader of the agent was slightly stunned, but he immediately understood the meaning of the old butler's words. There was a traitor in his team, and the Tai family no longer trusted them. At least under the current circumstances, they had no choice but to choose not to trust them. He was silent for a moment and decided that this was the only thing he could do at the moment, so he nodded. Butler Jean looked at Taizion's side profile and said, The personnel of the security team have entered this area of the stadium and are currently exchanging fire. They should be able to clear this area in 3 minutes. Since that phone call, Taizion's security had been transferred from the special task force to the Tai family's own security team. Since the enemy could even infiltrate the special task force and possibly use mechas, then the road leading out of the stadium would definitely be filled with assassins responsible for sniping. At this moment, the members of the Tai family's security team had already started exchanging fire with these people. Since Butler Jean had given them 3 minutes, he must have been very confident in his subordinates. Taizion listened quietly and then suddenly said, Can you find the location of the military mecha in 3 minutes? No. Butler Jean watched from the corner of his eye as the special task force agents began to make their way to the room beside the private room. He replied softly, It's precisely because we can't that we need to leave as soon as possible. After a moment of silence, Taizion shook his head. Looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the stadium below, he said softly, There are over 30,000 spectators. Even if they were to evacuate urgently, it would still take more than 10 minutes. I'll be out in 3 minutes. If that military mecha had chosen to attack at that time, how many people would have died? I don't want innocent citizens to be my meat shield. When Sulu heard this, a sincere and appreciative smile appeared on his face. Taizion looked at him and smiled. He calmly sat back down on the sofa and said to Butler Jean calmly, The enemy must have taken your reaction time into consideration. If we were to leave now, they might be waiting for this moment. If that's the case, why don't we wait? After all, they should be more anxious than us. Butler Jean was silent for a long time. Then he turned around and left. The phone in his hand was connected again. He continuously issued orders in a low voice, asking for support from the family. At this moment, his phone call represented the will of the Tai family. Every order would be carried out effectively. Every message delivered would cause an unquenchable shock within the Federation. You surprised me. Sulu sat on the other side of the sofa. He held a glass of wine and took big gulps to suppress the anxiety and nervousness in his heart. Other than when his uncle was being hunted down by the Federal Army, he had never experienced such a big scene in his life. You don't have to praise me. I know that I'm in a privileged class with a strong sense of morality. Taizion took a sip of wine and said with a self-deprecating smile, Actually, you surprised me more. Not to mention your reaction earlier. At least you still have the guts to stay here and drink with me. That's really something. I don't know if I'll be turned into a hornet's nest once I leave the room. Since that's the case, I might as well stay here with you. I think it's safer here. Sulu smiled bitterly and said honestly, actually, I'm very nervous. At this time, the members of the Tai family's security team had completely taken over the work of the agents. The top floor of the stadium had been confirmed to be safe. However, there were still occasional sounds of gunfire coming from outside the VIP room. The people who were slowly leaving the stadium definitely didn't notice these sounds. However, the 2 young men in the VIP room knew very well that these sounds were the sounds of special guns firing non-stop. 2 minutes had already passed. The Tai family's security team was gradually clearing out the path of retreat. However, no one felt relaxed. According to the reports of those team members, the people on the other side seemed to be a group of well-trained professional soldiers. Then they thought about the military mecha that had been running hot for more than 10 minutes and still hadn't found its exact location. Everyone was very nervous. Sulu was also the same. Although he had experienced some things before, such as personally witnessing a hair-raising mecha battle in the valley in the suburbs of Hushi state capital, and even having a black gun barrel pointed at his temple several times, he was still very nervous right now. After all, he was just an ordinary young man who had lived a normal life since he was young. This kind of invisible danger was like some kind of chemical fog, making the air in the VIP room seem heavy, making it difficult for him to breathe. I'm very sorry to have dragged you into this. Taizion looked at Sulu quietly, but there was a hint of meaning in his smile. He said with a smile, right now, your face seems to be even paler than mine. That's because I'm hungry. Sulu wasn't lying. Earlier, when he used that mysterious power in his body, his stomach instantly felt hungry. He ate a few snacks and drank a few glasses of wine, but his face still didn't have much of a red flush. However, he didn't know that the sight of him casually eating and drinking on the sofa was in the eyes of Taizion and Butler Jean, a sign that he had a clear mind and was not afraid of external things. It seems that important people like you live a very dangerous life. Sulu shook his head and said, but, are you really not afraid at all? Taizion was silent for a long time. He smiled and raised his left hand that had been resting on the sofa's armrest. That hand, which was as thin as a woman's, trembled slightly in the air. Of course I'm afraid. Because I'm still young. I'm destined to do many great things in this life. I can't bear to die, so I'm afraid of death. But I can't let others know that I'm afraid. He paused for a moment, then said with a smile, to be honest, I don't have many such incidents in my life. For me, being assassinated is a very strange experience. Not even once in the past? Sulu asked curiously, as if he wanted to use the conversation to ease the tension in his heart. When I was young, I hid my identity and studied in a primary school in the capital. At the time I was in the same class as Zouyu. Taizion's eyes suddenly became blank. He recalled then one day in the 6th grade of primary school, I was preparing to get on the bus when a heavy truck suddenly rushed over from the other end of the street. The truck rushed all the way over. I thought that I was going to die, but unexpectedly, the last tire of the truck suddenly burst. The truck forcibly changed direction about 10 meters in front of me and crashed into a large tree. It wasn't a traffic accident? Later, the police determined that the nature of the accident was a hit and run. The truck crashed into 4 cars on the street, including our school bus. Just looking at the scene, it did look like a car accident. Taizion's eyes suddenly became cold. A total of 17 people died. Only 2 students from our class died. When the truck finally changed direction, it was shot by the security personnel of my family who were hiding across the school with an anti-material gun. Taizion's brows flashed with a trace of gloom. From that day onwards I transferred schools. Other than the occasional contact with Zouyu, I never returned to that school. I also never went to school with the normal people in the Federation again. My life has only been in danger once. Taizion's expression calmed down and he said, our family has only one son for 7 generations, so we have always been very careful about these things. Today is the 2nd time. The first time my luck was not bad, so I hope that today's luck is not bad. Sulu looked at Taizion's slightly pale and thin face, and his heart suddenly sympathized with the other person. He felt that the other person's life yesterday was not much better than his own life as an orphan and fugitive. Thinking about that night in the H1 area, when the person in front of him who was younger than him fainted and helpless in his arms, his heart surged with the urge to protect the other person. Don't worry, you'll be fine today, Sulu said very seriously. The passage is clear, there is no crowd we can pass through. In the communication device, someone used a fast and steady voice to report. Wearing bulletproof vests and helmets, Taizion and Sulu walked out of the VIP room under the protection of more than 10 fully armed security personnel, and walked out of the gymnasium. There were 2 corpses lying in the elevator reserved for VIPs. The doors of the elevator opened and closed repeatedly, repeating the same process for eternity. There was a series of hurried footsteps on the empty stairs. Sulu, who was following behind Taizan, saw the bullet marks on the wall and the blood around the corner through the glass mask. He listened to his own hurried breathing and quickly followed the group down the stairs. He wondered in his heart how many of the Tai family's security personnel had died here today. The gymnasium had already been cleared by the security personnel to ensure that it was safe. The service personnel who were lucky enough to survive the gunfight were gathered in a room. When the group of people walked past the room, Sulu could not help but take a look inside. He saw the frightened expressions on the faces of the girls, and he felt slightly perplexed. The stairs led directly to the underground parking lot. The group of people opened the door and saw a black car without any logo. The back door of the black car was already open, and Butler Jean was sitting in the driver's seat. Chapter 118. Seeing this black car without any logo, security personnel wearing dark combat suits rushed out in the shortest time possible and spread out around the car. Although these bodyguards, who were obviously from the military, still maintained vigilance on their faces, the anxiety in their eyes lessened a lot. Sulu noticed that Tai Ziyuan in front of him, the muscles on his back that had been tight all this time also relaxed at this moment. The danger was not over. The people present were either well-trained professionals or people like Tai Ziyuan, who had a calmness that was not in line with his age. The only reason for their sudden relaxation was that black car. Sulu judged that his companion seemed to have infinite confidence in this black car. However, even if this black car was specially made and could be bulletproof, could it withstand the attack of a military mecha? A trace of confusion flashed through Sulu's mind. At the same time, his eyes passed over the black car's ceiling that reflected the parking lot lights and fell on the concrete wall directly facing the door. In the luxury box, he was able to discover the mole earlier than the special task force agents because he was an outsider. Secondly, he had extremely keen eyesight and hearing. Thirdly, it was because of his experience in the past year. Since escaping from Donglin, he had been carefully observing and guarding everything around him. He was always worried that one day the police or special forces of the Federation would come to deal with him. Therefore, when he did not feel absolutely safe, he would look at everyone with a suspicious gaze. And all the unusual places. Gradually, this seemed to have become an instinct of his. His eyes fell on the concrete wall and found that it was a little wet. At the same time, he faintly heard a sizzling sound, and his heart trembled. This observation and thinking did not take long. At this moment, Tai Ziyuan was under the protection of a bodyguard, using the fastest speed to get into the back of the black car. Sulu's pupils suddenly shrank, and he used his strength at will. The burning heat broke out again behind his waist, causing him to stomp his feet on the concrete floor. Like a fierce tiger, he pushed Tai Ziyuan to the ground and shouted, "Be careful!" His reaction was still a moment too slow. A black metal tip suddenly grew out of the slightly wet cement wall opposite the door. It hummed and rotated, and in a very short time, it pierced through the entire cement wall. It was very easy, like a knife piercing through a thin piece of paper. The cement wall couldn't withstand the force of the metal drill and instantly fell apart, scattering into countless pieces of cement and flying in all directions of the underground parking lot. A black mech about 5 meters tall slowly walked out from behind the broken cement wall. This scene was extremely shocking. It looked like a god of death had come out from the netherworld. The mech with a metallic luster was faintly discernible in the dust, as if it was going to reap the lives of everyone in the field. The black mecha's left mechanical arm was still spinning at high speed, while the right mechanical arm's Darlin's standard rotary gun began to spray bullets at the black cars and the surrounding Tai family security personnel. Darlin's rotary gun spewed out 6 brilliant blue flames, and countless metal bullets began to dance in the air. Sulu only had enough time to push Tai Ziyuan to the ground. He only had enough time to shout that one word before the black mech's firepower reverberated throughout the entire underground space. The bodyguard who had been following Tai Ziyuan all this time was instantly pierced through by those high-speed bullets. He was reduced to a pile of flesh and blood that enveloped the side of the black car. The black mecha's gunshots were very strange and dull, as if countless balloons were exploding. Puff, 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 puff. It wasn't that terrifying, but the bullets dancing in the air in the underground parking lot were abnormally terrifying. The military mecha's frightening speed of firing made the bullets cover the entire area like raindrops. Loud whistling sounds, the sound of bullets piercing through the air. The sound was terrifying. The black mecha's right mechanical arm spat out endless gunfire, cutting through the air and making ear-piercing screeching sounds. The bullets carried enormous kinetic energy and lethality, and in an instant, the cement walls of the parking lot were smashed into pieces. Countless sharp cement shards fell off and flew in an irregular pattern, shooting in all directions. The Federation's technology combined with the military's killing machine, at this moment, fully displayed its infinite power. No matter how well-trained a soldier was, in front of this black mecha that walked out from the dust, they would only feel their own insignificance and endless despair. As for the elite security personnel of the Tai family, they didn't even have the time to feel despair. Within the first second after the black mecha broke through the cement walls, they were all shot into countless pieces by the black mecha's gunfire. The Tai family's security personnel had already carried out full control of the underground parking lot. They also knew that in the surrounding areas of the gymnasium, there might be a mecha that had already completed its warm-up activation. However, no one would have thought that this standard military mecha had actually been hiding under the gymnasium all this time, just waiting behind that slightly wet cement wall. That cement wall was obviously newly built. It was even possible that after the other party found out about Taizion's whereabouts, they built it overnight last night. If the Tai family had more time to react, more time to prepare, they might not have made such a mistake. If the Federation's Rapid Response Department had more time, perhaps they would have already found out where the mecha was hiding. However, there were no ifs in this world. A mecha that had wandered out of the control of the military was in itself an inconceivable matter. Who would be able to fully understand the layers and layers of inside information behind this? And the faction that planned today's operation against Tai Ziyuan was actually able to come up with such a meticulous plan in such a short amount of time. They even had the ability to secretly transport a 5-meter-tall mecha to Linhai and into the underground parking lot of the gymnasium right before Jian Shue'er's concert. All these signs indicated that the person who planned and executed this assassination plan was not only as crazy as Taizion had described, but also had a kind of genius or idiotic imagination. The appearance of this standard black military mecha had undoubtedly hit the weak spot of all the countermeasures of the Tai family. The most crucial part was the timing and location of its appearance. In just 1 second, that black mecha had eliminated all the enemies. Its strength was really enough to make people despair. Only those who were still alive could feel despair, such as Su Lu, who was lying in a pool of blood from the security personnel. However, Taizion did not seem to be in despair. Cold sweat had begun to form on his pale face, but his eyes were still fixed on the door of the black car not far in front of him. It was as if he was certain that as long as he could enter that black car, even if the opponent was a military mecha, he would still be able to survive. In the first second of the mech's attacks, this black car had indeed displayed an inconceivable ability to withstand attacks. It was unknown what special material the body and tires of this car were made of, but under the frenzied barrage of the black mech Darren's revolver, countless deep metallic glints appeared on the body of the car. Some of the edges of the car had already been pierced through, ripping open powerlessly. However, the body of the black car did not suffer any irreversible damage. Although those extremely tragic-looking large bullet holes glowed with a pitiful metallic glow, not a single bullet hole was able to pierce through the interior of the car. In what should have been a quiet underground car park, the sound of electric current crackling and the strange sound of alloy tracks grinding against the concrete floor rang out. The atmosphere was particularly gloomy and somber. Amidst the noise, amidst the dust, amidst the bloody fog in the air, that black mecha approached the black car. On its right mechanical arm, Darren's rotating gun barrel was still wildly firing bullets, not stopping for even a moment. The black car was continuously hit by the bullets, miserably bouncing off the ground and then falling heavily once again. The tires slid on the concrete floor. The black mecha's gunfire was like an invisible hand, pushing it in the direction of the main entrance. In front of the enormous firepower, the black car without any insignia was like a small boat in a storm. At any time it could be overturned by those dazzling waves of gunfire, and then be torn into countless pieces, sinking to the bottom of the sea, never to rise again. And in the only angle that the black car could cover, Su Lu and Taizuan, who were in the pool of blood, could not even lift their heads under the flying metal shards and concrete. They were even more unable to retreat into the interior of the stadium, and could only wait for the metal shells to tear them into pieces. M52, it's an M52. Su Lu lay in the pool of blood, mumbling incessantly. Looking through the bottom of the black car, he saw that the mechatrax had already entered advance mode. He anxiously and angrily discovered the model of this powerful mecha. Boundless fear made Su Li's face abnormally pale, but it also made his mind abnormally clear at this moment. The secretion of adrenaline allowed this young man to finally show that his nerves were stronger than anyone else's in this desperate situation. In this moment he was a rock of Donglin. Under the attacks of the black mecha, a rock would also shatter like tofu. But until the moment it truly shattered, the rock would always be able to maintain a terrifying calmness, just like Su Lu at this moment. He narrowed his eyes, his entire body cold as he recalled all the blueprints of the M-type mecha in his mind. He recalled the firing speed of Garland's rotating gun barrel, recalled the loading capacity of the M52's chain magazine, and calculated the time 4 seconds after the appearance of the black mecha. Su Lu and Taizion were the only two living people left in the underground car park. Su Lu and Taizion. Under the impact of this level of power, Su Lu knew very well whether or not Butler Jean in the black car had been jolted to death. He only knew that he only had time to calculate for 2 seconds. It was at this moment that his ears, which were already buzzing from the vibrations, caught a sound. That extremely soft sound was like the friction between a piece of paper and another piece of paper. The scientists of the Federation had never been able to solve the problem caused by the inherent structure of the M-series mecha, the 0.2-second pause when the chain magazine reloaded. Although Su Lu was a genius in mechanical engineering, he did not have the ability to solve this problem. However, he knew this problem, knew that he only had 0.2 seconds, and he had been preparing for this 0.2 second. Chapter 119. Pause of 0.2 seconds. If a human was not able to focus, they would not be able to notice it at all. Even if they did notice this pause, they would not be able to react, unless this person's reflexes and the ability of the body to achieve this speed were different from the rest. Coincidentally, Su Lu was such a person who was different from the rest. In that instant, the muscle fibers in his body twisted and stretched, exploding with terrifying strength. This strength was converted into speed, and like a gray shadow, he shot up slightly from the ground, grabbed Taizion by the back of his neck, and threw him into the car. The unique muffled sound of Darren's gun barrel rang out once more, and the dense stream of bullets slammed heavily into the already tattered body of the black car, sending it flying off the ground once more. Su Li's good luck came to an end at this moment. Taizion had already been thrown into the backseat of the car, but because the car had suddenly shot up, his body slammed heavily into the bottom of the heavy back door of the car, unable to enter. With a muffled thud, Su Lu painfully collided with metal and fell to the ground. At the same time his body hit the ground, the 4 wheels of the black car that had been sent flying by the mecha's firepower also landed heavily on the ground at almost the same time. In the instant before the black car landed on the ground, its tires had already begun to spin rapidly while still in the air. Butler Jean, who had been sitting in the front row without knowing whether he was alive or dead, reacted at some point. In that split second he made preparations to escape. Screech, screech. The tires rubbed against the ground, producing a sharp sound. Smoke rose and there were even sparks. With a screech, the moment the black car landed, it gripped the ground in a decisive manner and shot forward. In just an instant, it had become a plume of dust that rushed towards the underground parking lot. Its speed was truly astounding. Several streaks of blood had just appeared on Su Li's face, but before they could flow down, he stared dumbfoundedly as the black car carrying Taizion sped away, leaving him in the parking lot filled with flesh and blood and the smell of gunfire. And at this time, without the black car as a cover, he stood next to the enormous and powerful black military M52 mecha, looking very lonely and small. After Su Lu threw Taizion into the car, he realized that when he was still outside the car, he didn't yell at Butler Jean, "Start the car," like those righteous protagonists in movies. "Don't mind me," because he didn't have time to shout, and he didn't want to be left behind. Although he knew full well that the black car had to seize the opportunity to escape, he was certain that this was not Taizion's intention. Instead, it was the most logical choice that Butler Jean had made. If he had been able to react in time, perhaps he would have subconsciously asked Taizion to escape first and not bother about him. However, he still felt extremely frustrated. Everyone had either died or escaped, leaving him alone to face that black M52 mech? Sulu half-crouched on the blood-soaked concrete floor. His pupils constricted nervously as he stared at the black mech that was turning around not too far away from him. That black metallic military mecha didn't pay any attention to the unarmed young man beside it. Its target was the black car that was currently speeding away from the underground parking lot, because it knew very well that the heir of the Tai family was in that car. And in its opinion, no matter how well trained a human was, he would not be able to pose any threat to its powerful mecha, not to mention that the human did not have any heavy weapons in his hands. And so, the black M52 mecha turned around silently. Amidst a series of static noises, the lower half of the mecha began to enter full movement mode. Meanwhile, on the right mechanical arm of the mecha, a metal barrel-like component had already protruded, aiming at the black car that was already 50 meters away, and was about to reach the underground parking lot. Su Li's entire body was in intense pain. He stared in disbelief at the movements of the black mecha in front of him. In an instant he recognized the component protruding from the mecha's right mechanical arm. It was the main cannon. Taiyon awkwardly squeezed into the car, but was immediately jolted up by the violent vibrations. Then he saw that Butler Jean, who had been in the driver's seat, had raised his head at some point. He was looking ahead silently, and the battle scene around the car window was instantly cast behind him. His face was pale, and he immediately noticed that Sulu was not in the car. He abruptly turned his head, and through the cracked rear window that was still intact, he looked back. Then his expression became abnormally complex, because he saw a scene that he could not accept. Far away in the underground parking lot, that huge black mecha was turning around amidst the sound of static. Meanwhile, his friend Sulu was half kneeling in a pool of blood beside the mecha's mechanical leg. He looked like an ant that could be trampled to death at any moment. Meanwhile, behind the completely collapsed concrete wall, several fully armed killers were forcing their way through the area the mecha had opened up. A pained expression appeared on Shizun's handsome face, and his usually calm eyes were filled with boundless anger and grief. He knew that no matter whether it was a random move from that military mecha or those mecha squad soldiers hiding behind the concrete wall, they could easily kill Sulu. His thin lips were tightly pressed together. His hands gripped the back seat of the car so hard that his fingertips dug deep into it, but he did not say a word. Sulu had saved his life once again, but he could only watch as his benefactor died. This was because he knew that even if he stopped the car and drove back now, he would not be able to save the other's life. Moreover, at this critical juncture, Butler Jean would definitely not listen to his orders. Taizion's emotions were very complicated. Mecha's main cannon firing. Defense probability 40%. The car's central control computer began to beep urgently and began to issue a stern warning. The seatbelts automatically popped out and strapped the bodies of the people in the car tightly to their seats. Like Sulu, Taijian narrowed his eyes slightly. Through the spiderweb-like glass, he looked at the black mecha's raised right mechanical arm in the distance. He looked at the incomparably tiny Sulu beside the black mecha, as though he had not heard the warning at all. Sulu half knelt in the pool of blood. He looked at the huge mecha not far in front of him and slowly but terrifyingly used its right mechanical arm to aim at the fleeing black car in the distance. Since he was young, he had been constantly learning about mecha mechanics. After a year of absorbing information at Ua University, he could easily determine that this M52's main cannon, which had the highest output power, would hit the fleeing black car in 0.3 seconds. The black car had already demonstrated its powerful defensive capabilities in the previous attack. However, Sulu did not think that the black car would be able to survive the attack of this mecha's main cannon. Even if it was the Empire's armored mecha, under the close-range attack of an M52's main cannon, it would only end up with a hole in the middle. The black M52 mecha let out a sizzling sound. The powerful firepower prepared for the attack caused this huge and heavy mecha's body to begin to tremble slightly. Kneeling beside the mecha, Su Li's face was pale, and his body began to tremble violently. His eyes stared coldly at the M52 mecha in front of him, at the alloy hydraulic pipe that was exposed to him in attack mode. Although that black car had left him almost heartlessly, other than anger, Sulu did not have time to develop too many negative emotions. Just as he had always emphasized to Shi Qinghai, he was a person who only knew how to use his hands and not his mouth. He was a very direct person. The reason Su Lu had fallen into such a hopeless situation was because he wanted to save Taizun. At this time the Black Mecha was about to kill Taiyun. If he were to say that he had died because of Taizun, and Taizun had still died in the end, this would be an extremely unreconciled and infuriating matter. It was a bit of a mouthful, but in Su Li's mind it was only a fleeting thought. Unreconciled, not worth it. A wave of stubborn viciousness quickly took over his entire body. The corpses lying in the pool of blood around him, as well as the innocent victims he had seen in the gymnasium earlier, stimulated his long-hidden bloodthirst. How could he stop the Black Mecha's main cannon from firing? Su Lu had no choice. Although he was not an ordinary person, he was not a god either. He could only stare fixedly at the hydraulic pipe behind the mecha's right mechanical leg. Then a familiar image appeared before his eyes. It was a verdant valley, and behind a big tree was a black M52 mech. That uncle with a familiar face smashed into the tree like a cannonball, breaking the hydraulic pipe with a single punch. Oil shot out like a waterfall, and the M52, which had lost its balance, immediately toppled over. Su Lu had only seen the blueprints of the mecha before the M37 series, so he did not know which aspects of the current military's most advanced M52 mecha had flaws. However, Uncle Feng Yu's ferocious figure in battle with the mecha had already given him the most profound lesson. The military mecha that was locked onto the black car's trajectory coldly ignored the ant-like Su Lu. How could it have known that the ant had already reached out with its little pincers, trying to take a bite out of the elephant's leg? The posture of this black M52 mech before Su Li's eyes was too cool. It just so happened that the hydraulic pipe was exposed right in front of Su Li's eyes. The position and angle of the hydraulic pipe closest to Su Lu were all perfect. It was like a slut sticking up her butt and telling others to come and kick her. Come and kick her. Su Lu, who had already been blinded by viciousness and bloodthirst, was moved at this moment. His heart was itching, and there was not a part of his body that was not itching. So his whole body trembled, his face pale, his eyes extremely bright. Like a madman he charged out, aiming at the hydraulic pipe on the black mecha's right mechanical leg, and viciously kicked it. Chapter 120. He was an orphan who lost both his parents and his younger sister. He was a sincere and kind young man who liked to help his neighbors and help old ladies cross the road. He was a genius in mechanical engineering. He was an auditing student who had set many records in Yue University. He was a small character who was sincere to others and honest to himself. He was a capable, virtuous, and responsible youth. However, he was also a youth who grew up in the darkness of the mines and underground tunnels. He was a fugitive from the Federation who possessed a mysterious power within his body. Sometimes even he himself forgot that many years ago, he was already a silent youth who dared to kill. On that deep and weeping night, the 10-year-old Su Lu used the tip of an abandoned mechanical suit's elbow hydraulic pipe he found in the junkyard to kill a Hushi prefecture mafia boss. In the underground parking lot filled with the stench of blood and an oppressive atmosphere, the not yet 20-year-old Su Lu leapt up from the ground like a leopard. Like a streak of black smoke, he rushed to the bottom of the military mecha. Without thinking, his entire body trembled as he viciously kicked that conspicuous hydraulic pipe that deserved to be kicked. In his life, perhaps he really did have a lot of affinity with this type of hydraulic pipe. Every time, he would be able to witness his most fearful, most ruthless moments, and no matter how the Federation's scientists used their imaginations, for such a large mechanical body like a mecha, the most critical linkage of the control system and structural system was still the same as it had been countless years ago, all of them the most primitive type of hydraulic system. There had been scientists who had proposed other designs before, but the cold and merciless battlefield experience had long since proven that only the most primitive type was the most reliable and sturdy. The mechanical legs of the M52 mecha had at least 7 hydraulic pipes of different thicknesses and different uses. Most of them were hidden under the armor, some deep within the alloy structure, while the exposed hydraulic pipe was all formed from alloy in one go. It was thicker than a human's thigh, strong enough to withstand concentrated fire, so the designers had never thought of installing any anti-strike device on this hydraulic pipe. This was because a monster like the mechanic Feng Yu should not exist in this world. Su Li's body trembled violently. The enormous power in his body instantly passed through the countless pathways in his body, and all of it was delivered to his thighs, his joints and his feet. The foot that carried with it a fierce whistling sound ruthlessly kicked the cold and sturdy alloy hydraulic pipe, making a loud muffled sound. The moment the pair of leather boots came into contact with the hydraulic pipe, they began to deform and tear apart. In a very short period of time, they bloomed into countless pieces, fluttering and struggling around Su Li's feet like butterflies, but they did not have time to fly away. The power that came from behind his waist passed from the soles of his feet to the hydraulic pipe. The metallic luster of the hydraulic pipe dimmed a little, and then it trembled slightly, and then it returned to normal. The cold metal didn't have the slightest ripple. The hydraulic pipe did not break, and it did not collapse like the mecha that had been hit by Fengyu in the outskirts of Heshi province a year ago, bathed in oil like a waterfall and collapsed. That black mecha did not move at all. It coldly aimed at the black car that was about to escape from the underground parking lot, and fired its main cannon. In that instant Su Lu felt as if his foot had kicked a metal plate. No, he had kicked an iron pillar that had taken root in the ground. A wave of pain that was enough to make a person faint traveled from the soles of his feet to his ankles, then to his knees and finally to the base of his thighs. He could even feel countless cracks beginning to extend from his toes. Countless muscle fibers began to tear, and even his leg bones began to crack. An unarmed and defenseless human using his own flesh and blood to launch an attack against a massive metal mecha. This was a crazy move. Furthermore, the incomparably large recoil from that mecha's metal body further proved that this kind of challenge was too tragic to be effective. Su Lu was sent flying by the recoil. The power he had been using to control his body had long been reduced to nothingness by the mecha's recoil. His body flew through the air like a kite with a broken string. Before the immense pain could fully occupy his mind, his leg bones were already completely shattered, hanging limply in the air. He felt as if all his bones had been shattered, and a sweet feeling began to accumulate in his chest and abdomen. Su Lu, who had been sent flying, danced in the air, his eyes watching the black mecha in front of him from the corner of his eye. He knew that he was not Uncle Fengyu, and did not have the ability to subdue a mecha single-handedly. He himself also did not have such extravagant hopes, so he was not disappointed, much less despairing. Instead, an incomparable flame of elation burned in his eyes, because he knew this kick had definitely been effective. It was just that where the effect was no one knew. The hydraulic tube by the black mecha's mechanical leg only trembled slightly under his foot, then returned to normal. However, in a place that neither the naked eye nor the mecha's monitoring system could detect, within the absolutely sealed fluid flowing within the tube, between the inductive component circuits that the mecha's control system relied on, a tremor began to spread. It was just like the pain and bone fractures that were spreading through Su Li's body at this moment. That tremor was very similar to Su Li's earlier tremors. Su Lu ended his journey of being sent flying. His head tilted back, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood as he landed heavily on the ground. At the same time he landed, the black mecha had also finished firing its main cannon. There was a saying in the Federation: if you deviated 1 centimeter from the correct direction at the beginning of your journey, by the time you finished your journey, you would find yourself 1,000 kilometers away from your destination. Su Li's foot kicked the hydraulic tube, transmitting all the tremors in his body to it, causing the sealed fluid within the hydraulic tube to distort slightly. This was an error that the mecha's program would never allow, but this error happened in that instant. A vibration of about 0.01 millimeters was transmitted into the body of the massive mecha, along with the ripples of the fluid. It gradually spread, passing through those electrical components and circuits, passing through those electrical and data channels, spreading, and was gradually magnified. In that instant, the right half of the black M52 mecha's body began to tremble slightly to an extent that was not visible to the naked eye. By the time the vibration of 0.01 millimeters reached the right mechanical arm of the black mecha, it had already become an error of 1 millimeter. A loud boom rang out. The main cannon of the military mecha had already exceeded the concept of normal speed. A vortex suddenly appeared in the air within the underground car park, and right in the middle of the vortex was an incomparably empty space. An empty space. Right in the path of the main cannon's aim, 3 holes the size of basketballs appeared almost simultaneously on the 3 thick concrete walls of the underground car park. The 3 holes were cut neatly in a straight line, and on the other side of the holes was the black car that was currently speeding away. However, due to the error of less than a millimeter, this terrifying blast brushed past the roof of the black car and directly pierced through 2 more concrete walls, landing somewhere unknown. An instant later, a terrifying explosion rang out from a room in the gymnasium's basement, and the entire ground began to shake, directly piercing through 5 concrete walls and finally triggering such a violent explosion. The power of the military M52 mecha's main cannon was truly too shocking. It was hard to imagine, if this blast had landed directly on the black car, Taeseon and butler Jean in the car would have died a horrible death. Sulu, who had landed in a pool of blood on the concrete floor, was once again bounced up from the ground by this blast. There was not a single part of his body that did not ache. However, his eyes, reddened by the blood, watched as the black car in the distance finally left the underground car park. He could not help but break into a grin, revealing his white teeth amidst the smoke as he laughed out loud. At the same time, his right hand found a cold gun by the side of the half-broken corpse beside him. That huge black mecha clearly did not expect its main cannon attack to actually miss its target. Although the pilot in the mecha's cockpit had felt a trace of surprise when that human had kicked the mecha in a frenzy earlier, his strong nerve control, logical judgment, and the instinct of a soldier to obey orders allowed him to completely ignore the kick that the lunatic had launched with his frail body. He simply aimed at the car and fired the main cannon. At this time, the pilot in the M52 mecha finally noticed that the fellow in the green military trench coat lying under the mecha's feet seemed to be a little unusual. However, he did not have the time to find out what was so unusual about this fellow's body. Just as the black car disappeared from the underground car park, this mecha warrior used his communicator to issue orders to the soldiers accompanying him. At the same time, his hands moved like the wind as he entered 17 data commands on the touch-sensitive holographic screen. Amidst the loud roar of the motor, this huge mecha began to move abruptly. Like an ice skater relying on the caterpillar equipment on its alloy legs, it started to move rapidly in the cramped underground car park. In an instant, it increased its speed. The black metal mecha glided beautifully forward as it chased after the human towards the exit of the underground car park, leaving behind only the piercing sound of air vibrations. The black M52 mecha chased after the human so resolutely, so decisively, so coldly. It did not even spare a glance at Sulu, who had piqued its interest immensely. Sulu, who had used a human's body to successfully cause his main cannon to miss. Other than the special class ace pilots of the federal military, who else could make such swift reactions and control so beautifully? The huge and terrifying black mecha chased after the car Taeseon was in. Accompanied by the sound of dust and air vibrations, it disappeared from the exit. At this moment, Sulu was in a state of shock, but he could not worry about Taeyeon's survival at all. This was because right now, he could only worry about his own survival. In the quiet underground parking lot, the smell of burnt flesh and blood filled the air. The surrounding concrete walls that had been flattened by the mecha's firepower still continued to fall with pieces of concrete and steel. There were 5 shocking round bullet holes in the concrete wall that separated the parking lot. Smoke was rising from them. The lights in the car park had all been extinguished long ago. This was because the automatic fire extinguishing system in response to explosions and high temperatures kept spraying water as if it was raining. This scene was extremely similar to that rainy night when Sulu had killed for the first time. Chapter 121. In the darkness, water splashed everywhere. The gun that Sulu had picked up instantly spat out a flame, illuminating the mist in front of the gun muzzle. It created a beautiful refracted ray of light that was as beautiful as a rainbow. He raised his right arm high and waved it quickly. The flame and the beautiful ray of light in the surroundings quickly dispersed, as if a red fan had suddenly opened up. A few muffled sounds rang out. It was unknown how many bullets had hit the militants, and how many bullets had hit the hard concrete walls. In the darkness, only the vague silhouettes of 6 or 7 militants could be seen. One of the silhouettes let out a muffled groan. His neck snapped, and he fell to the ground. Sulu had never been in the military before. He had only memorized countless battle regulations and battle formations for the Ministry of Defense's Mecha Operator exam. Actually, this knowledge was not very useful for his exam, but Uncle Feng Yu had asked him to learn, so he had obediently learned. He had never thought that it would be useful at this moment. The bullets that he had randomly scattered in his nervousness had actually successfully hit a target. This should be the first time he had fired a gun. The heavy feeling on his wrist and the slightly numb recoil made his body, which was lying in the puddle of water, feel a little uncomfortable. This standard repeating gun should have belonged to one of the Tai family's security guards. However, that security guard had already died in the ambush of that military mecha. His corpse had been torn into countless pieces. Luckily, the safety of this gun had been switched off, allowing Su Lu to complete his shot in the first instant. Su Li's reaction was very fast. What was even more admirable was his unyielding, silent and determined personality. After being sent flying to the ground by the mecha, his subconscious action was to search for a weapon on the ground. He wanted to continue fighting for his life, even if it was just a struggle. In the darkness, in order to not expose himself, Su Li's right arm was raised extremely high. Even so, that group of well-trained militants could still accurately determine his position. A rapid rain of bullets rang out, and the sharp sound of bullets breaking through the air rang out. Countless splashes of water and concrete were sent flying everywhere. He had only been bitten by a mosquito. Su Lu leaned against the back door and breathed rapidly. His chest heaved up and down as he felt the pain in his right arm. He knew that he had been shot by the militants before he slipped through the door. However, in the darkness he did not know where he was shot. He only knew that there was a bullet wound on his right arm. Blood was flowing out and the pain was destroying his nerves. He was only bitten by a mosquito. In the darkness his face was pale but no one could see it. His eyes were bright to a terrifying degree. He breathed heavily, not caring whether the militants could hear him or not. He kept repeating the words about mosquitoes, convincing himself not to care about his injuries, convincing himself that he could still survive in such a difficult time. What was more serious than the gunshot wound was the injury to his right leg. Earlier, in order to shake that large and heavy mecha, he had focused all the strength in his body on his leg and kicked out. Although he had successfully destroyed the attack of the mecha's main cannon, the recoil from that huge force had directly destroyed his right leg. Right now, his right leg was twisted in a horrible position. The broken bone inside was cutting into his red and swollen leg muscles. It was very painful, but the pain was numbing. Su Lu couldn't feel it at all. The rainwater in the underground parking lot was still spraying out. The smell of blood was slightly lighter than before, but the burnt smell was getting stronger. It was unknown whether the room that had been hit by the mecha's main cannon was currently burning with a raging fire. Su Lu lay on the ground, silently gripping that unfamiliar metal gun. On the other side of the door were several militants who had participated in the assassination. These militants clearly had a military background and were used to following mecha in group operations. However, they were also no strangers to individual combat. This silent, intense standoff didn't last long. At least it didn't last as long as Su Lu felt. The group of militants didn't have much time to waste with him. They needed to retreat before the Federation's powerful forces could react. However, under the light of the First Charter, even if they retreated, it would probably be difficult for them to leave the Federation. The sound of gunfire rang out again. Countless bullets struck that heavy door, sending sparks and fragments flying. If this door in the underground parking lot wasn't made of metal, it was likely that Su Lu, who was behind the door, would already have been turned into a hornet's nest by now. Behind the door, Su Lu shrunk his body as much as possible to avoid being hit by the stray bullets flying in all directions. He didn't dare to raise his head at all, and he didn't dare to move. However, that gun was consciously raised by him and aimed at a certain angle beside him. This was completely based on his intuition. The gunshots had just stopped when a fierce figure pounced in. Su Li's index finger flicked lightly, and a bullet sprayed out from the barrel of the gun in his hand, knocking down that figure directly. However, after he flicked his finger, he found that he was wrong. This wasn't one of the militants, but the corpse of a security personnel whose body had been sliced in half by the mecha's shrapnel. Su Li's pupils contracted. He knew that he had reached the moment between life and death. In his originally empty body, a new surge of strength had unknowingly surged up. With a muffled grunt, he used his only intact left leg to push against the back of the door, forcefully sliding half a meter to the side on the ground. Just as he slid, a black gun barrel quietly poked out from behind the door and hit the spot where he was originally standing, setting off a series of sparks. After narrowly dodging the shot, Su Li's slightly narrowed eyes emitted an extremely bright light. He suddenly lunged to the side and fired the gun in his hand again. The militant who rushed in with the submachine gun in both hands was immediately enveloped in a rain of bullets. The bullets hit the man's bulletproof vest and made a muffled sound. He directly slammed into the door, making a loud noise. Su Lu raised the muzzle slightly and directly shot the man's head into a watermelon that fell to the ground. In the dark environment, the half-open door was like the mouth of a legendary monster, as if it was going to swallow all life. The militants on the other side of the door should be thinking this, and Su Lu behind the door was even more thinking this. He struggled to half squat against the wall, not knowing how many bullets were left in the gun in his hand. He should have picked up the dead militant's submachine gun, but he just carefully moved over there, hiding his body behind the dead body. His right hand slowly lowered, touching the side of his boots. At this time, in the quiet and dark tunnel behind Su Lu, there was suddenly a series of footsteps. The footsteps were very light. If it was not a child, then it should be a very light woman. The footsteps should not be a person. In such a tense moment, there were still people in the stadium that did not evacuate. Su Li's eyes were filled with deep worry. If those innocent people were to come here, then only death would await them. Fuck your mother, fuck your mother. Su Li's face was expressionless as he cursed. No one knew what these curses meant to him, but his pair of always smiling, seemingly incomparably sincere eyes became brighter and brighter, more and more determined. Don't come over, he shouted to the owner of the footsteps behind the darkness. Following his voice, the gunshots outside the door once again sounded. The gunfire cut through the space in front of Su Lu, making him unable to do anything. He could only watch as the two militants rushed over and entered the door. Fuck your mother, Su Lu softly cursed, and then rushed toward the two figures. The two militants clearly did not expect him to be so fearless as to hide so close to the door. They also did not expect him to react so quickly. At this moment, Su Li's movements were extremely fast. At the moment of life and death, he erupted with all the strength in his body. The trembling began to squeeze his already exhausted body, as if it wanted to squeeze out every drop of strength from his muscle fibers. He was like a gray shadow pouncing forward. In an extremely short distance, he pulled the trigger and shot down the militant who was slightly further away. He instantly threw away the gun in his hand, and at the same time the gun left his hand, his body suddenly crashed into the other militant. Suddenly, his elbow struck the cartilage of the opponent's throat. Using the hard bone of his waist, he fiercely struck the vital point of the opponent's crotch. Extending his fingertips fiercely pierced the opponent's eye socket. From the time he started training in the mine to the time he became a janitor in Yue University, he did not slack off for a single day. The arduous training made the 10 postures that Uncle Feng Yu taught Su Lu become an instinct of his body. At this moment his strength completely erupted, vividly displaying it. That comfortable and ruthless feeling made him forget that he was dragging a crippled leg and had been shot several times. They were all strange and heroic body techniques. His throat was broken, his mouth was shattered, his eyeballs were split open, and his blood and juices were splattered everywhere. The militant did not even make a sound as he fell in front of Su Lu. However, at this moment his body was already exposed at the door. Su Lu did not stop in the slightest. Carrying the militant's corpse, he silently and bravely rushed out. The sound of gunshots rang out. A metal tool suddenly appeared in Su Li's right elbow. With a press of his finger, a faint blue electric arc suddenly illuminated the corner of the underground parking lot. A militant on the side was struck by the electric arc, his body twitching as he fell. The submachine gun in his hand was still firing, but it hit the thigh of one of his companions. Su Lu rushed over, the tip of the stun baton in his hand already reaching out, directly stabbing at the fellow who was kneeling on the ground. However, these militants were worthy of being called elite soldiers of the army. Although Su Li's sudden appearance had inexplicably killed several of their companions, This fellow who was accidentally injured by his companions still displayed the outstanding individual qualities of the Federation soldiers at this crucial moment. Chapter 122. The stun baton that Sulu had named Flying Dagger had been cleverly modified into a multi-purpose tool. The electric shock effect at the front was still intact, but the back of the handle was designed with a retractable dagger tip. Earlier, he had electrocuted one of the militants unconscious. With a swipe of his right elbow, he held the dagger tightly between his thumb and index finger and stabbed towards the throat of the last militant. Unexpectedly, at the last moment, the militant actually turned the submachine gun in his hand into a cold weapon and directly blocked his wrist. As a soldier who had undergone many years of cruel training, his body possessed great strength, especially when he was holding a gun while Sulu was only holding a small dagger. When the two were compared, Sulu felt a strong vibration coming from his wrist in an instant. It made Sulu feel that something was wrong. At this time, he who was heavily injured had no strength to use. Those strange postures that he had trained hard for many years were like water without a source. Also, he was burdened by his injury and could not use any strength. In the faint light, looking at the cold and bloodthirsty eyes of the person close by, Sulu felt his whole body go cold. It was as if he was exposed to the wind and snow of Linhai province outside the stadium. At this critical moment, a strength of unknown origin once again emerged from behind his waist and quickly surged towards his upper body. It directly passed through a certain area behind his neck and transmitted to both of his arms. Sulu did not have time to enjoy this dramatic change. With a muffled groan, he spat out a mouthful of blood. A burst of intense and bone-deep pain exploded at the back of his neck. The explosion caused his eyes to turn red and his pupils to constrict. His lips trembled incessantly. The skin exposed to the outside was painful as if it was about to split open. And his brain felt as if there were countless needles piercing endlessly. Sulu, who had been silent all this time, was used to being silent. Even when he thought that he was going to die, he would only curse softly or in his heart. Under this unbearable and immense pain, he finally cried out. Following this mournful howl, he placed his left hand on his right wrist and pushed forward along the pain. With a puffed eye in front of the heavy and incomparably sturdy mecha, Sulu was just an ordinary person. No matter how strong his strength was, he could only make the mecha tremble slightly. Compared to ordinary people, he who had been taught by Fengyu for many years, was actually more like a machine than those soldiers who were made of iron. He was not a cold-killing machine but rather his body. The muscle fibers, nerve bundles, and even every cell in his body were constantly advancing in the direction of the first order of machines. In front of machines, no matter how strong a soldier was, how could they resist? The sharp tip of the dagger that protruded from the back of the handle easily pierced through like a thin piece of paper. In an instant, the militant's arm was shaken off, and the submachine gun was sent flying. Sulu, in his state of incomparable pain, subconsciously stabbed for the last time, making that small dagger give birth to a feeling of crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Blood spurted out as the dagger easily and casually pierced the militant's throat. Sulu's whole body went limp. His eyes turned slightly black as he collapsed to the ground. At this time he could not find the slightest bit of strength in his body. That intense pain was still constantly emitting waves from the back of his neck. 10,000 needles, 100 million needles pierced and pulled out from his brain, making him completely forget about his crippled leg and those gunshot wounds. In the moment before he fell to the ground, from the corner of his eyes, he saw with incomparable pain that the militant that he had electrocuted earlier was currently trying to get up from the ground. It seemed that the combat suits worn by these soldiers also had a certain degree of resistance to electric current. Sulu knew that he was about to faint and would not be able to wake up again. This was because other than fainting, there was no other way for his body to withstand the pain at the back of his neck. This was a natural instinctive reaction of the human body, in order to protect the brain. If that militant got up and faced him while he was unconscious, then Sulu would definitely die. In the instant before he fainted, he somewhat helplessly thought of his incomparably tragic end. At this time at this place there was no one who could save him. He would definitely die. In the instant before he died, many people's images flashed through Sulu's mind. He thought of many things just like in a movie, but he sorrowfully confirmed that this was not a movie. It doesn't matter, everything doesn't matter. I've seen Jian Shuier, and I've also had a woman. Even if I die, this life can be considered complete. Don't people live to do the right thing? Death, not because of Tai Ziyuan, not because of the political strife or the black screen that I don't know about, but because those people are doing wrong, so I should stop them. But, I'm still so young. Su Lu was influenced by Shi Qinghai. Using the title of Little Master, he quickly told himself his last words in his mind. Then he fell heavily on the cement floor full of dirty water. His eyes turned black and he fainted. That ordinary face that had fallen into a coma still had a trace of a bitter smile. The bustling university town of Linhai became a lot more deserted because of the cold winter and the snowstorm. But today, Jian Shuiyer's first concert in the Federation brought prosperity and liveliness back to this large city group. After watching the concert, people left the stadium still in high spirits. Along the developed road and rail network, people dispersed to various campuses or cities in Linhai. In the northeast direction of the stadium, there was a highway that was particularly deserted compared to other places, because this highway directly led to another state in the Federation. It required about 12 hours of travel between the ice fields and the mountains to reach it. In such cold weather, no one would choose to go through this highway. Not to mention, because of the continuous snowstorm, this highway was basically in a half-closed state. However, at this time on this half-closed highway, there was a black car without any logo driving at full speed. Because it was in a half-closed state, the Federation's Traffic Management Committee turned off the automatic heating and snow removal function of this highway, so the snow on the road was very thick. This car ran over the thick snow and ice chips all the way, but its battered body didn't move at all. It still maintained its balance and stability. The black car didn't see a single car along the way. Taizun had unknowingly sat in the co-driver's seat. The two-way seat belt tightly fastened his body. His expression was very cold. His eyes were indifferently looking out the window at the ice and snow wilderness that flashed by from time to time. The target is approaching again. It will enter the attack zone in 7 seconds. The central control computer of the black car issued a warning once again. The car that the Tai family prepared for their heir was extremely powerful no matter how one looked at it. The intelligent judgment program of the central control computer of the car was faintly similar to the central control computer of a spaceship. The moment the computer's voice faded away, a thrilling image appeared on the rear-view screen of the black car. Not far behind the highway, a black military-grade M52 mecha could be seen advancing rapidly in an unstoppable manner. That mecha had already completely switched to forward mode. Accompanied by the vibrations of the huge mecha breaking through the air, the alloy tracks of the mecha continued to crush snow and ice, crushing the concrete blocks on the highway. Its momentum was truly astonishing. Inside the black car, Taizun and Butler Jin's expressions didn't change at all. After coming out of the underground parking lot of the stadium, Butler Jin consciously chose the northeast highway without Tai Ziyuan's order. Although this might bring some convenience to the pursuit of the military mecha, at least it could ensure that the attack of the military mecha wouldn't cause too much panic among the Federation citizens. The scene of the black military mecha charging out of the stadium and chasing after the black car naturally fell into the eyes of some Federation citizens. However, as long as the war didn't happen in a densely populated area, it could always be covered up in the future. Once the heavy military mecha's horsepower was at full power, it could easily overtake tanks or armored vehicles on open plains. Even on a civilian highway, it wouldn't be hard to believe that it could catch up to the expensive sports cars of the Federation. However, the black car that the Tai family's security personnel used as a source of confidence was, of course, a specially made product. It shouldn't only be able to reach a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Perhaps because the black car had been attacked too harshly in the underground parking lot, its power equipment had been damaged, so it couldn't reach its maximum speed. The black mecha had been chasing after the black car for 2 minutes now. The black car had entered a desolate area with few buildings. The black mecha behind them was getting closer and closer. Seeing that it was about to enter the attack range of the onboard weapons, Butler Jin's expression was still calm. He said softly, "It's not safe. Should we shake it off?" It seemed that it wasn't that the black car of the Tai family couldn't shake off the black mecha behind it, but that it had been holding back for some reason. No. Taizhuan's eyes stared at the snow outside the window. His heart was even colder than the snow. His hand gripped the handrail of the car window tightly. His knuckles were slightly white. Just a moment ago, his heart suddenly trembled and ached. It was as if something had happened in the stadium that he didn't want to imagine. People from the military are involved in the assassination of civilians. This is equivalent to treason. Taizhuan's pale face was expressionless. Under the light of the first charter, they are prepared to die at any time. They won't give up any information. If that's the case, don't give them a chance to escape to the Great Triangle. Let them all die. Especially this mecha. Butler Jean was silent for a moment, then nodded. Right at this moment, a few strange chirps came from the horizon. It seemed that some kind of flying object was rapidly approaching. Moreover, it was flying at a low altitude. That was why the air was buzzing and the snow on both sides of the road was trembling. Butler Jin's eyes narrowed slightly. He said softly, "They're here." As he spoke, 7 black dots on the horizon at the end of the snowy road were rapidly approaching. They rapidly expanded in their field of vision, revealing their true identities. With a buzz, the snow on both sides of the road shattered. 7 of the most advanced fighter jets of the Federation flew at high speed in a low-altitude combat mode. They flew towards the black car and the valiant black M52 mecha behind it. Chapter 123. The black M52 mecha drove out of the stadium's underground parking lot at high speed and chased after the black car, all the way to the snow-covered highway. The pilot who was piloting this mech had always maintained an absolute calm and a strong determination to complete the mission, but his mentality had already undergone some subtle changes. The pilot in the black mecha was called NATO. He was the model of the Federation's military, the most outstanding elite, and the winner of 4 Purple Star medals. The mecha under his control did not make any unnecessary movements. Every move was simple, clear, and deadly. 10 years ago, he had personally piloted the mecha and destroyed 14 Empire mechas on the grassland on a planet controlled by the Empire during the Federation Army's counterattack through the space portal. The black mecha he piloted appeared for the first time. Like a demon, it broke through the thick concrete wall and appeared abruptly from the concrete blocks and smoke. In just 1 second, it had eliminated all the Tai family security personnel except for the area around the black car. The black mech perfectly controlled the angle of its fan-shaped shooting, trying its best to maximize the lethality of each bullet. With his ability, he should not have given the opponent any chance to escape after lurking for an entire night and using a mecha to ambush a Federation citizen. However, there were 2 accidents during the assassination. These 2 accidents were out of his control and were not his responsibility. The first accident was the black car. NATO, the major in the black mecha, had never imagined that the Federation would have such a sturdy car. Although he knew very well who his target was and how powerful the family behind that young man was, it was still a black car, not a mecha. How was this possible? Even after using up the chain magazine of the M52, such terrifying firepower had only left behind those ugly deep metal craters on the car's body, and had not penetrated the car's body. It was because of the black car's terrifying defensive capabilities that Butler Jean had survived. It had also given Su Lu and Taizhuan, who had reacted quickly, a chance to survive. For Na Duo, the second surprise of the day was the young man in the Westwoods uniform. This excellent pilot did not know why a soldier from the Westwoods would suddenly appear beside his target, but he did not care about the non-target at first, until the other party valiantly and crazily kicked his mech's mechanical leg. The situation at that time was very much like a Federation proverb. On the highway, a poor insect is holding up its armored arm, trying to show off, trying to stop a speeding vehicle. However, this seemingly crazy and foolish action had successfully interfered with the black mecha's main cannon. Na Duo did not understand why the mecha in his hands, which had always been incomparably stable, would suddenly tremble slightly in that instant. Regardless of whether it was the automatic balancer or his own manual control, neither of them could complete the final calibration. As a result, the first shot from Jiagong's main cannon had actually deviated from its target. This was a strange thing that Na Duo had never encountered in his 20 years of military service. How much force did that young soldier from the West Woods need to be able to shake the multi-ton body of the M52? And how did the force of that kick interfere with the internal control system of the mecha? Even at this time, driving at high speed on the snowy road, Na Duo still felt that the M52 mecha, which had always been like his own body, seemed to have some sort of wave interference. This caused his control of the mecha to not be particularly smooth, so he kept following the black car but was unable to quickly close in. Most of the citizens of the Federation were materialists, especially the citizens of the 3 administrative planets of the capital ring. Na Duo felt that there was a small problem with his mecha, but he would never have guessed that the young soldier from the Westwoods was still affecting it. His instincts told him that the black car of the Tai family in front of him was using some sort of interference device. It had been some time since the pursuit began in the underground parking lot. The black mecha seemed to be in a fierce pursuit, but it was always unable to reach the effective range of its attack. The mecha still had plenty of power, but it did not have much ammunition left. Na Duo treasured every shot he fired and did not want to waste it. Although the half of his face that was exposed outside of the black helmet was still cold and calm, a very bad feeling had begun to form in his heart. The confidence of this elite soldier of the Federation was slowly fading. He felt a trace of panic and a faint sense of despair. Although this pursuit happened on the deserted highway, it was still in the core area of the Federation, Area S1. The response of the powerful departments of the government would arrive soon. His mission today could only end in failure. Right at this time, thunder seemed to roar in the distant sky. Na Duo stared at the 7 light marks that appeared on the holographic screen in front of him. He confirmed that these were the fighter jets of the Federation. He confirmed that these 7 advanced fighter jets had flown at low altitude and avoided the surveillance radar equipment of the mecha that covered a radius of 20 kilometers. The internal warning of the mecha rang, reminding him that the fighter jets had locked onto his body and could be attacked at any time. These were the K-12 fighter jets that the Federation was most equipped with. They could carry a maximum of 9 air-to-ground missiles. 7 fighters meant that there would be 63 missiles. In just an instant, this number appeared in Na Duo's mind. However, at this time he instead calmed down. Even if he failed today, it would not be the fault of the battle. Instead, it would be those strange accidents and fate that were interfering with his work. At this moment, the resolute lines of the soldier's face became as sharp as a knife. Countless movement commands were inputted into the touch-sensitive holographic screen. Meanwhile, the mecha, which had been maintaining full speed all this while, also began to rapidly change form amidst the loud electrical noise. The tracks on the bottom left their tracks, and the mechanical legs reached out once more, carving deep marks into the concrete ground. Amidst the whooshing sounds, more than 10 gray lines shot over at high speed from the horizon. These were the standard oxtail air-to-ground missiles that the Federation fighter jets were equipped with. These missiles brushed past the edge of the black car in front, shooting towards the black mecha that was rapidly moving in a strange posture behind it. Right at this moment, the black mecha's mechanical legs abruptly stomped on the ground. The entire mecha suddenly leaned forward at high speed, as if it was about to fall to the ground. However, the body of the mecha relied on inertia to flip around in the air, performing a beautiful movement similar to a fighter jet's wing. Amidst the dense barrage of missiles, the mecha found the only path and glided forward, actually dodging all of them. Those terrifying missiles brushed past the black mecha's massive body and struck the surface of the highway, exploding. Who knew how much snow and concrete were sent flying into the air, sending a cloud of dust into the air. However, one of the missiles had landed between the black car and the mecha. Although the mecha had successfully saved its life in that extremely dangerous moment, it could not avoid the missile that had exploded on the concrete ground in front of it. The missile exploded 20 meters in front of the mech. At the last moment, the black mecha still displayed its powerful combat power. Its power output instantly exceeded its peak value. Taking the risk of losing control of the mecha, Na Duo controlled the mecha to perform a jaw-dropping leap on the ground. It avoided the shockwave caused by the missile and flew directly into the sky. However, what was terrifying was that after the missile exploded, it rose even faster than the smoke and dust. Amidst a series of strange and sharp whistling sounds, countless thread-like substances that contrasted with the snowy light suddenly burst out of the missile. The black M52 mech managed to avoid the shockwave and shrapnel from the front, but in the air it was completely unable to avoid those strands of reflective substance that flew everywhere like catkins. Pus 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 pus. Those fine lines seemed to have a magnetic force, quickly sticking to the smooth and firm surface of the black mech. Those were some dark-colored things that looked like graphite bundles. Electromagnetic beam bomb. Inside the mecha, Na-Duo felt a chill in his heart and gave up all hope. The Federation's rescue department had actually, in such a short period of time, installed an electromagnetic beam bomb specifically designed to target mecha. He no longer had any hope of escaping. The sizzling sound of electricity rang out. Those dark-colored metal wires sticking to the surface of the black mecha began to flash violently with blue electric arcs. At this time, the M52 mecha was still gliding valiantly through the air due to inertia. In an instant, it was enveloped by the blue electric arcs, appearing extremely strange. The blue electric arcs disappeared instantly, but the M52 seemed to have lost all power. Its movements in the air abruptly froze, and like a puppet whose strings had been cut, it fell heavily to the ground. Then it rolled forward stiffly, smashing a large crater in the concrete ground, leaving a perfectly straight trail behind it. After the missiles, the fighter jet finally arrived. Several muffled sounds rang out at almost the same time. The projectiles fired by the ground-to-air cannons plowed several deep trenches in the ground. Cement splattered everywhere, and smoke and dust flew all over the place, heading straight for the mecha that had already lost its ability to operate. Countless muffled sounds rang out from the surface of the black mecha at the same time. Those sturdy alloy armor of the mecha began to deform, begin to be penetrated, begin to be damaged, begin to become an existence akin to trash. Without the sound of sirens, the Special Forces team of the Federation's 1st Military Region approached the black mecha in the middle of the road in silence and vigilance. Behind them, the armored vehicles with full firepower reserves were ready. This black mecha's control system had been destroyed by the electromagnetic beam bomb of the fighter jet, and it had also been mercilessly raked by the ground-to-air cannons. The entire body of the mecha had become extremely tattered, lying miserably on the road. It looked like it no longer had any combat ability. However, in the eyes of the Federation soldiers, mecha were the most powerful and also the most unpredictable combat machines. They did not know whether or not any accidents would happen. The cabin door of the black M52 slowly opened. On the road below the mecha, the soldiers raised the muzzles in their hands. The sound of metal clanging against metal rang out one after another behind the mecha. Taking off his helmet, Na-Duo wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He glanced coldly at the soldiers closing in on the mecha. Listening to those vague voices ordering him to abandon the mecha and surrender, he slowly shook his head. When he had faced those 7 Federation planes earlier, he had actually been confident that he could at least shoot down one of the planes that had taken the risk of flying at a low altitude. Even though the mecha's automatic control system had been destroyed, he still believed that he could control the mecha and make those soldiers below pay a heavy price. However, since the mission had already failed, he did not want to make a move against those soldiers. As fellow soldiers, they should have fought together on the battlefield. They should not have become enemies in the first place. The soldier Na-Duo looked at the black car at the corner in the distance and narrowed his eyes. He lightly patted the slightly hot metal body beneath him, took out a handgun and aimed it at his temple. He silently pulled the trigger. Chapter 124. Slay the dimples and says cutely, I'm still writing the next chapter, but the content is more critical, so I'm writing it too slowly. It might be a bit late. Everyone has leaders who need to sleep early, so sleep early. You can come and read it tomorrow, but please leave your monthly ticket. But this pig of mine doesn't seem to have dimples, so I'll slay the fat face. The crisp sound of gunfire echoed in the ears of the nervous soldiers moving forward, reverberating on the quiet highway in the northern suburbs of the university town, reverberating between the snow-covered sky and earth. Taizion retracted his gaze from the screen and tightened his coat around him. He looked at the heavily damaged black mecha in the distance and frowned, not saying a word for a long time. He didn't know the name of that dead soldier, but he figured that he would find out soon enough. This soldier was clearly an ace pilot of the Federal Army. From the initial ambush in the gymnasium to the subsequent operation on the highway, it all showed this person's incomparable military prowess. Taizion looked at the other side of the highway, a trace of heaviness flashing across his slightly pale face that didn't match his age. Today he had almost died under the attack of the mecha. Now that he had confirmed that he was safe, he felt a trace of fear, but he didn't show it. Only the hands exposed outside his sleeves trembled slightly. The faint sound of a helicopter came from the end of the highway. The blood on Butler Jin's forehead had already dried up. He put down the phone beside his ear and came to Taizion's side. He lowered his voice and said, "The soldier in the mecha is Major Nato, a recipient of 4 Purple Star medals. He is a war hero and belongs to the 2nd Military Region Special Mecha Brigade. He is the deputy commander. He was supposed to be in the Special Capital Region today to participate in a training session hosted by the Ministry of National Defense." Taizion was silent for a moment, then asked, "The 2nd Military Region? The Ministry of National Defense's spring offensive should be using the 2nd Military Region as the main force. If my guess is correct, this Major Nato must have had many comrades who died in the encirclement of the anti-government forces." "Yes. This training session in the Special Capital Region is for the upcoming spring offensive against the anti-government forces base in the Green Dragon Mountain region." Butler Jean glanced at the young master's side profile. Yesterday, Councilman Pabre reached a preliminary agreement with the anti-government forces. Today there's an assassination attempt against you. It seems that the Eagle faction is very angry about the family's interference this time. Don't be in a hurry to find out who the suspect is. The investigation and trial after the incident is the responsibility of the Federation government. Although I'm angry, I can't go above the law and declare someone guilty." Taizion's eyes were as calm as ever. If this matter is related to the reconciliation agreement, there should be many people who don't want the government to reach a reconciliation agreement with the anti-government army. Butler Jean nodded. Although the two of them didn't say it out loud, they both knew that this was the most shocking assassination attempt in the Federation in the past 20 years. The mastermind behind it was definitely not that simple. Councilman Pabre had already taken the most solid step on his path to becoming the president of the Federation. The families and economic tycoons in the Federation all had their own partners among the candidates for the presidency. If this assassination attempt was to eliminate Councilman Pabre's greatest support in the Federation, then the shadows of those families might also be involved. At this time, the simple phone in Butler Jin's hand rang again. He picked up the call and listened in silence for a long time. Then he said to Taizion in a soft and apologetic voice, "The police and the Federation Investigation Bureau have already sealed off the stadium's underground parking lot. The family representatives have also entered. But for the time being, they haven't found the whereabouts of your friend." "Haven't found him?" Previously, when they were still being pursued, Taizion had already asked Butler Jean to follow the government's handling of the stadium. He wanted to know whether Su Lu could actually survive such a desperate situation. Hearing the words "haven't found him," Taizion raised his voice slightly and said angrily, "We can see him when he's alive, and we can see his body when he's dead. What do you mean by haven't found him?" The firepower of the military use mecha was too strong. The body left behind is basically incomplete. Butler Jean glanced worriedly at Taizion as he adjusted his tone. The government personnel are currently cleaning up the scene, so it's normal that they haven't found anything in a short time. According to the reports from the other side, based on the situation at the scene, even if the chip identifies the body, it will still take a long time. Therefore, they may use the biomarker identification program, but that will take 2 weeks. Taizion's usually calm eyes suddenly dimmed. Thinking that Sulu might have already become several pieces of broken flesh in the dark underground space, his stomach began to churn. If Sulu had been lucky enough to survive, he should still be in the stadium's underground parking lot right now. If he unfortunately died, he forced himself to calm down and turned to look at Butler Jean. "Regardless of whether he's dead or alive, I can't wait that long for news. Think of a way to ask that elder from the Bureau of Proclamation for help." The easiest way to confirm the death of a Federation citizen was naturally through the Bureau of Proclamation's central computer. However, the Bureau of Proclamation's computer was responsible for the entire Federation's electronic surveillance network. It was very rare for it to specifically confirm the death of a specific target, unless it was under special circumstances. The current director of the Bureau of Proclamation was a distant relative of the Tai family. Although he was 8 generations removed from Tai Zion, in the 7 generations of the Tai family, he was the only relative of the Tai family in this world. If the Bureau of Proclamation confirms that Su Lu is still alive, ask them to help find Su Li's whereabouts. Tai Zion walked towards the tattered black car, leaving behind his last words. Butler Jin's white hair fluttered in the cold wind. He looked at the young master's back with a complicated expression. Although he knew that this was the first time the young master had experienced the death of a friend in his life, he still didn't expect that the young master's usual calm would soon be unable to hide the emotions in his heart. Su Lu was naturally dead. Asking the Bureau of Proclamation for help was really not a wise decision. It will take at least 2 days to send an application to the Bureau of Proclamation through the government department and get it approved, Butler Jin said behind him. Taixian didn't turn around. He used silence to indicate that this matter had to be done as soon as possible. Mission failed. Federation S1 Capital Special District, in a room in an apartment on a quiet street. The room's windows were covered with a layer of light-filtering film, which could prevent surveillance and even military thermal imaging systems from snooping. In a slightly dark room, a soldier in his 30s put down the phone and looked at his business partner across the table with a serious expression. His business partner was very mysterious, but provided enough information to their side. The news that Taixian was going to watch the concert today was confirmed last night. The soldier stood up from the table and began to organize the documents on the table. He lowered his head and said, "Although I still don't know who the person behind you is, and the cooperation this time was not successful, I hope that there will be opportunities for cooperation in the future." The ordinary person across the table wearing a gray synthetic sweater smiled. He didn't stand up, but he didn't rush to leave either. He looked at the soldier and said, "Who said that our cooperation was not successful? Although the young master of the Tai family escaped with his life, I think that the people behind you have already achieved more than half of their goal." After a moment of silence, the soldier smiled. "We're all small fries that are put on the table. Who knows what the people we serve want to do? But I'm curious how you know that I don't belong to those hot-blooded officers of the 2nd Military Region. Because you are too calm." The soldier fixed the slightly wrinkled synthetic sweater on his body, walked to the window, and carefully looked at the imposing and sturdy building across from him. He said softly, "We are all bystanders. The person who really did it is still in an office in the Ministry of National Defense." The soldier had already organized his belongings and walked behind the soldier. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the Federation's Ministry of National Defense building. He sighed and said, "As a soldier, I actually admire these comrades who are brave enough to ignore the law for the fate of the Federation. But you caused them to go to jail." The soldier's eyes shrunk. He looked at the dozens of military vehicles on the street rushing into the training center next to the Ministry of National Defense building and said, "I don't know how many of the officers in the 2nd Military Region will be eliminated this time. I didn't expect the government and the Tai family to react so quickly." The soldier slowly stood up straight and said with a hint of fear, "The assassination over there just ended, and they were able to find the training center. Her son almost died. Anyone can imagine how angry that madam must be. And in a sense, even the president has to show some mercy in front of that madam's anger. I have to go." The soldier simply turned around and left the dark room. He walked up the stairs of this welfare apartment that belonged to the Ministry of National Defense, took out the phone in his pocket, and began to report to his superior. "Mr. Representative, mission failed." In the dark room, the soldier in the synthetic sweater also made a call. After he calmed down, he said softly, "Mr. Representative, mission failed." After a moment of silence on the other side of the phone, an old voice sounded, "Throw out the bait. I don't want to become the victim of the Tai family's anger. I think you don't want to either." The soldier's expression suddenly became very shocked. He didn't expect that the senator would be so afraid of the Tai family. He didn't even hesitate to cut off his biggest supporter in the Federation government. The soldier and the soldier in the synthetic sweater were just like what they said. They were just insignificant people in the Federation. But the people they served were the people with the most power and influence in the Federation. They didn't know each other's names and identities. They only worked together temporarily for a common goal. They reached an agreement with some important people in the federal military and started to carry out the most unbelievable assassination in the Federation in the past 20 years. Now that the mission was confirmed to have failed, they both smiled at each other and comforted themselves that they could still get some political benefits from the follow-up. But they knew that a failure was a failure, and it was a complete failure. Chapter 125. The assassination in the gymnasium was successfully covered up by the Federation government. On the first day of the new year, if a huge scandal of the military participating in the assassination of civilians broke out, from the president to the Minister of Defense, from the Federation Bureau of Investigation to the Linhai State Governor, no one would have a good year. Although they knew very well that the target of the assassination was not a real civilian, and the cold tone of the madam on the phone made them even more clear that the Federation government had to thoroughly investigate this matter, and not randomly find a scapegoat like the countless political incidents in history. However, the government still needed to hide the truth of the matter from the public, because the government, in the last year of its term, could not withstand any more storms. Fortunately, the madam tacitly agreed with the government's attitude, and even used her family's influence to help the government seal the mouths of most of the media. That night and the next day's television news, as well as the various authoritative print and electronic newspapers, there were no reports of the assassination in the gymnasium in Linhai State's university town. On the contrary, the entertainment and lifestyle section focused on the grand scene of Miss Jian Shui'er's first concert in her life. The media reporters, which the government did not want to face the most, were collectively silent in front of this incident. On one hand, they were under pressure from all sides, and on the other hand, they were keenly aware of a certain atmosphere within the Federation. They were waiting to see if the government would give the media and the public some sort of explanation. However, some of the citizens who dispersed later had personally witnessed a black mecha break through the walls of the gymnasium in the wind and snow, charging onto the highway in the northeast direction. These people could not erase their own memories. They were puzzled and did not see any answers in the newspapers, so they could only let these memories become some rumors circulating on internet message boards, as well as shocking headlines in the usually extremely unpopular tabloids. On the day of the assassination, the investigation of the powerful departments of the Federation had already begun with great urgency, because the officers of various departments and bureaus had all received calls from the President's office or some important members of the Management Committee to personally investigate. The enormous national machinery of the Federation government began to operate, and in the shortest amount of time, they found even more information from the pilot named NATO. How did a Federation war hero, the recipient of 4 Purple Star medals, become a shameful assassin? This required historical critics and writers to develop their ideas. The investigators of the Federation government did not pay attention to this. Instead, they directly investigated the Capital Special District. Shortly after the assassination, Special Task Force agents and officials from the Federation Investigation Department, under the protection of the Military Police Headquarters of the Ministry of National Defense, rode in a dozen military vehicles and rushed into the training center next to the Ministry of National Defense building. Under the shocked gazes of countless Federation soldiers, they arrested a total of 93 officers of various ranks from the 2nd Military Region, who had come from the front lines of Region S2. The interrogation began quickly that night. There was no interrogation by torture or electric shock. There were only bright lights, surveillance equipment everywhere, and interrogators and recorders who were as cold as metal. The interrogation did not yield any results. The officers who had returned from the front lines and sacrificed their youth and sweat for the Federation coldly stared at the officials in front of them. Their eyes were filled with anger and disdain. The officers who felt that they had been insulted began to curse. After a stalemate for half a night, the interrogators gathered the officers together. The director of the 4th Department of the Federation Investigation Department, who was in charge of the investigation of the assassination, looked coldly at the arrogant and fearless officers in front of him. After a moment of silence, he said, "As a soldier of the Federation, there is a reasonable way to express your wishes. No one disrespects what you have done for the Federation. However, as a soldier, you should respect the law. Some of you know, and some of you may not know. But what I want to say is that the Bureau of Proclamation has marked this incident in the Linhai State Gymnasium as a first-order incident. You should know very well how first-order incidents are dealt with. The high-ranking official of the Federation Investigation Department narrowed his eyes. The coldness in his eyes grew. Do not try to cover up or quibble for your crimes. That will only make your families suffer more humiliation. These officers were escorted back to the training center by the fully armed military police. However, at this time, their identities had become criminal suspects, and they were no longer pillars of the Federation with a bright future ahead of them. Just as these people left the temporary interrogation center, an official walked to the side of the director of the 4th Department and said in a low voice, "The central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation has marked it as a third-order incident. Besides, even if it is a first-order incident, it won't be of much help to this case. Those old ancestors of the Bureau of Proclamation are the best at playing mysterious." The director of the 4th Department lowered his head slightly and said, "How would these officers know anything about the sequence of incidents? I'm just giving them some time to think, to be afraid." In the early hours of the next day, perhaps it was because they instinctively had endless respect for the glory of the First Order, or perhaps it was because these officers had a clearer understanding of the majesty of the law, but in any case, the trick of this high-ranking official of the Federation Investigation Department was clearly effective. No one turned themselves in, and no one gave an account of who had organized this assassination, how the black M52 mecha belonging to the 1st Military Region had ended up in the hands of Major NATO, and what kind of orders the small military team sent to the gymnasium had received. 7 officers committed suicide in their own rooms, and no one could be saved. They used this simple method to express their respect for the First Order and the law, to protect their superiors and the ideals that they were willing to sacrifice their lives for. That night, the official residence of the president was hosting a dinner party for the president and the Nebula Award winners. After the dinner party, there was a routine dance party. However, the aging scholars clearly had no desire to dance. They only politely and reservedly watched the dance partners on the dance floor. The applause did not stop. Everything was so lively and joyous. Mr. President Sieg was ending his 2nd term this year. It seemed that he was still a little reluctant to leave the official residence dance party. The people around him had sincere smiles on their faces as they watched the president and the first lady slowly spinning around. However, in their hearts they gave disdainful comments. This president was without a doubt the most unforgettable president in the history of the Federation. This was because during his time in office there was nothing worth writing about. His temperament was cowardly and violent, completely unlike the style he had in the military. If the voters 10 years ago were misled by the false image created by the media, then what about 5 years ago? However, President Sieg was also without a doubt the luckiest president in the history of the Federation. During his 10 years as president, there was no incident that could lead to criminal proceedings. The war between the Federation and the Empire had already ended after he was elected. The anti-government forces in S2 had been in the Federation's territory for many years, so no one would blame him for not solving this problem. It must be said that President Sieg was at least cautious enough, and this is actually an excellent quality. A young and handsome official silently looked at the president he had accompanied for 5 years, and gave a different evaluation in his heart. Then his expression changed slightly. He walked out of the crowd and came to a quiet corridor in the western part of the official residence. This official named Boog was the deputy director of the office of the president's official residence. He was responsible for handling a lot of administrative work, so even in such a beautiful dance party, his phone would still be connected. However, when he heard the unique vibration pattern of the phone in his inner pocket, he knew who was calling, so his expression became serious. "You should have heard about what happened this morning." A woman's calm voice came from the other side of the phone. "Yes, madam." Boog lowered his voice and smiled at the office worker who walked in front of him. "I don't want something like this to happen again, because I don't want my son to become the target of hatred of the entire federal military in the end." The woman's voice was calm and irresistible. No one thought that those officers would choose this method. After a moment of silence, Boog said, "I'm worried that as the investigation deepens, more people will choose to commit suicide or be killed. The investigation must be carried to the end. I need those real murderers to pay the price for such a shameless assassination. I don't want to criticize the work of the government, but I just want to say that there are enough clues to be found in this case. Please don't just focus on the officers of the 2nd Military Region. As a citizen of the Federation, and as the mother of the victim, I feel that this method is a bit difficult to accept. Boog hung up the phone and fell into deep thought. He knew what Lady Tai's call meant, and since it was like this, he could only criticize the work of the government himself. And according to the information reported by the investigation team, it seemed that the direction of the investigation was really going to touch on the aspects that made the government uneasy. He was a government official, but he was an administrative official. However, no one knew that in reality, he was an official cultivated by the Tai family. At the same time, late at night, Tai-son also received a call from his mother. He knew that the Federation government's investigation of the crime, after changing the direction, had successfully approached the core area. When he heard the name of that high-ranking official, even someone as calm as him couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Startled awake by the phone call and waking up from a nightmare, Tai-son couldn't sleep anymore. He put on his pajamas and sat beside the orange lamp on the sofa for a long time in silence. He kind of missed the pancakes and porridge that he used to eat at night. Chapter 126. Under the sky of the Federation, there was no such thing as a black curtain that would never be exposed. It was even more impossible for there to be a plan that was so perfect that no clues could be found. Once the black curtain was uncovered and the initiator was exposed, then it would definitely be met with an incomparably ruthless attack from the other side. Therefore, in the recent 10 long years, the political struggles of the Federation had long moved away from shady methods such as assassination. There were no more forces that dared to assassinate the president, and the various forces could at least maintain harmony on the surface. Therefore, on the first day of the 67th year of the Federation calendar, the incident that happened in the Linhai Stadium far away from the capital shocked all of the important figures in the capital. This was already outside the rules of the game, and was a method that was not accepted by the entire class. At this moment, all of the forces vaguely expressed their support for the Tai family, or at least maintained their neutrality and silence. The investigation of the Federation government made important progress that morning. Although the suicide of the 7 officers of the 2nd Military Region brought pressure to the work of the Federation Investigation Bureau, those staff members only changed their direction and continued to investigate. The identity of the militants that attacked the VIP area of the stadium had been identified. Those militants that all died were soldiers from the Linhai Garrison Special Forces. However, as to who gave the direct order to attack, and who was able to turn those soldiers loyal to the Federation into shameful assassination tools, for the time being no one was able to find out. However, the attentive officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau dug up another valuable clue from the newly built concrete wall in the underground parking lot of the stadium. The engineering team under the Northern Hemisphere Command of the 1st Military Region received this mission the night before the incident. Although the person who gave this order had carefully erased the information that represented their identity in the message, the second layer of information used by the military system was ignored by the person who gave the order. A special agent of the Federation Investigation Bureau keenly captured this point, and found a few letters that indicated their identity in the core sentence of the command document. This special agent had a nickname within the Investigation Bureau, called Harry Ball, because he liked to wear a synthetic sweater all year round. The Federation Investigation Bureau used the second layer of information to investigate, and all of the spearheads were pointed at a male secretary in the building of the Ministry of National Defense. On the morning of January 3 of the 67th Constitutional Calendar, the Ministry of National Defense building was as solemn and empty as ever. The bright marble floor of the building hall was painted with gold powder with the military emblem of the Federation. Silent and relaxed officers and women walked on this emblem. Inside the incomparably large building, it looked like the other side of the Federation's electronic wall. On the boundless grassland, a few fine horses passed by from time to time. The higher-ups in the building already knew what had happened the day before yesterday. Most of the people in the building already knew what had happened in the training center next to the building yesterday. As for the news that after the officers of the 2nd MR were collectively arrested, 7 officers committed suicide, presumably the middle-aged woman in charge of cleaning the building already knew. However, the personnel in the core area of the Federal Army still maintained a relaxed expression and a suitable smile on their lips, because the enormous machine would never collapse on itself because of a loose part or rust. The design style of the Department of Defense building was mainly a cold style. The outer wall did not use glass curtain walls that could absorb solar energy. Instead, it chose gray-black natural stone. The entire building was squarish, and the height of 17 floors made this squarish architectural style look a little stiff, like a box. In the internal conversations of the Federation government, it was customary to use the word box to refer to the Ministry of National Defense. This was because in the eyes of the general affairs officials, the soldiers of the Ministry of National Defense were like people in a box. Whether it was the way they walked or the way they talked, they were always so square and angular. On the penultimate floor of the Ministry of National Defense building, there was a very quiet and luxurious office at the end of the corridor. The Deputy Minister of National Defense, Yang Jingsong, worked in this office. Today, he came to the room half an hour early as usual. After drinking a cup of tea to refresh himself, he pulled up the military map of Region S2 on the holographic screen and zoomed in on the area around the mountains. He narrowed his eyes and carefully examined the map to confirm the Federal Army's spring offensive, and to minimize as many command problems as possible. Half an hour quickly passed, and his secretary still didn't knock on the door. Then she brought in a sandwich. Deputy Minister Yang gently pressed the remote control in his hand, and the map on the holographic screen disappeared. He silently walked to the window and glanced at the beautiful winter scenery of the capital outside. Then he turned around and sat on the sofa. His secretary hadn't arrived yet, but the phone on his desk rang. Deputy Minister Yang picked up the phone and listened carefully for a long time. He didn't say a word. Then he sat back on the sofa again. This time he didn't pick up the teacup. Instead, he found a bottle of liquor from the bookcase, poured himself a glass and slowly sipped. While drinking the amber liquid, this important figure of the federal military narrowed his eyes and thought about something. He didn't realize that the alcohol he hated the most was so harsh on his throat. His secretary had been invited to investigate, and it seemed that she would never come back. The news he just received on the phone was that the president's security advisor had already entered the Department of National Defense and was about to take the elevator to his office. Deputy Minister Yang's slightly weathered eyebrows slightly furrowed. He took out a document from the cabinet next to him and began to read it in a daze. Regarding the assassination at the Linhai State Gymnasium, although he didn't participate in the investigation, the details of the incident and the progress of the investigation would be sent to him at a certain time. Watching the other party approach him step by step was not a good feeling. After knowing that his secretary was arrested, the deputy minister's mood became more relaxed. Everything that happened on the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional era was all under his instructions and instructions. After Deputy Minister Yang Jingsong came back from the front line, he held many positions. Among them, the most respected position was the Dean of the First Military Academy. With his status in the Federation, the important figures who cooperated with him, and even Mr. President himself, would protect him at all costs. Just like the 7 officers who committed suicide the night before yesterday. But he didn't want to do this. He put down his wine glass and came in front of the computer. He wrote an email and sent it to the relevant personnel with the authority to receive it. 40 years ago, I was an ordinary soldier in the 2nd Military Region's Mechanic Company. I once saw with my own eyes countless Federation soldiers sacrifice themselves on the land of Green Dragon Mountain for a great goal. 40 years later, I am the Deputy Minister of the Federation's Department of National Defense. I have full authority to handle the spring offensive plan of the 67th year of the constitutional era. I have never believed the words of politicians. I am even more unwilling to hand the future of the Federation into the hands of people who haven't even seen blood with their own eyes. Having once served as the dean of a court, I know better than anyone that the military must act under the sacred rule of the Federation of Law and Order. But I often wonder if the collective will of the Federation of Law and Order has already become a toy in the hands of some people, or if it is the result of a compromise between them. Where exactly should the military go? A lawyer who grew up in a peaceful environment, without the authorization of the government, reached some kind of agreement with traitors. In my opinion, this is collusion, this is surrender. I believe that I have to stop this from happening. Perhaps history will judge that I am wrong, but I will never admit that I am wrong." After the email was sent, Deputy Minister Yang sighed softly. Many of his comrades who had sacrificed themselves in the war with the anti-government forces appeared in his mind. His gaze once again landed on the document in his hands. The assassination this time was to prevent the so-called reconciliation agreement from being reached. If Tai Ziyuan was killed, that family with a long history would naturally fall into decline or even collapse. And in this situation, Representative Pabre, who they supported, would definitely not be able to be elected president. Then, on the night before the new year, the agreement between Representative Pabre and the anti-government forces might never come to fruition. The reason why this deputy minister chose Tai Ziyuan and not Representative Pabre, whom he disdainfully called a lawyer, was because in his opinion if he killed Pabre, the Tai family, who was cowardly in their bones and ready to surrender at any moment, could still choose other political partners. It wouldn't solve the problem from the root. The deputy minister's calm gaze landed on an inconspicuous name on the document. If there was any regret in his heart right now, it would naturally be because the assassination plan that his loyal subordinates had meticulously prepared actually didn't succeed. The heir of the Tai family actually survived under the attack of the Mecca. According to the post-incident investigation, the person who played the most critical role in this, the person who had saved Tai Ziyuan's life twice in a row, was undoubtedly the young student who had already died, Su Lu. Deputy Minister Yang downed the strong liquor in his glass in one gulp, then opened the drawer and took out the old-fashioned handgun that had accompanied him for many years. He turned the muzzle of the gun somewhat clumsily and stuffed it into his mouth. He paused for a moment, took a few deep breaths and then pulled the trigger. The muffled sound of the gunshot echoed throughout the entire floor. The door to the deputy minister's office was forcefully pushed open. The white-haired presidential security advisor and the Minister of Defense pushed aside the military police in front of them and squeezed to the front. They looked at Deputy Minister Yang's corpse on the sofa chair, then at the large pool of shocking red on the snow-white wall behind the chair, and were speechless for a long time. "He can't stand trial," said the Federation security advisor in a low voice. "Perhaps this is the best result.